Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. So we're going to be looking at Easter today because here in Australia it is Good Friday, and I am having a debate with TurretinFan about whether Easter is the wrong translation according to the King James translation. So in Acts chapter 12 verse 4 it says, "And when he had apprehended him," that's Peter, and he being Herod, "when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people." And so that's Acts chapter 12, verse 4. So this is the only place that has the word Easter in the King James Bible. And so oftentimes people will that the argumentation ranges from people saying that they put it in deliberately because it's a pagan festival, or it was just an oversight, or that it was just left there because the Bishop's Bible had Easter there. And so my argumentation that I've made publicly since 2005, when I wrote my article, "Why We Should Not Pass Over Easter," I've made the claim that it is purely a Christian festival, that Easter is related to the German word Oster, which is related to the word Auferstehung, which means resurrection. And so we're going to look at all that today. And so what I want to do, if anyone wants to join in today, I really don't have much of a plan, but to read through some of the articles that I've done in the past and explain a few things, and just sort of answer questions. And so I'll put the live ticker there. Now, if anyone wants to join in StreamYard, now StreamYard's very easy to join. If you type in that link there, you will come to the StreamYard page, and you just follow the prompts, and it just makes sure that your camera's working, or if you don't want to be on camera, whether you want a little logo or something like that. And it checks your audio, and then basically you come up on my screen. I'll show you the interface. It'll go on for eternity down there. But so you just come up on my screen down here down the bottom, and I can remove or add. And so I think I can have up to 10 people because this is a paid account. So, if you want to join in and talk about Easter. Like, I know people want to join in and talk about all sorts of things and talk about what they're up to and everything, but it's like sometimes I listen to some of these King James TR live streams, and they go on for hours. Like, I know I drag on sometimes for 5 hours, but sometimes I listen to these King James TR chats, and I tune in. I listen for half an hour, and they're talking about having cups of tea and talking about also just sort of, I don't know, having fellowship, I guess, where we really want to sort of stick to the topic. We want people who are interested in this topic to jump onto this live stream or later on to listen to it and get edified and get fed, not just sort of listen to us, rambling on. But each to their own. Everyone does things their own way. So the Straightway says, "Hello, Nick." Hello, Straightway. Good to see you. So what I'm going to do, I'll just talk about the debate first. So we have King James error debate, because I noticed what happened when we were doing the unicorn debate between myself and TurretinFan. When we were just about to go live, TurretinFan said, I noticed, Nick, that in a lot of your videos, you really don't like being called King James only. And so, obviously, I don't like being called King James only if the person is saying the King James onlyism is Ruckmanism, and is like Sam Gipp, and is, into secondary inspiration. And there's a whole bunch of myths that go with that as well. I mean, half of these people don't even believe in that. But that's the King James only I'm not into. And so it's a bit like saying, there's all sorts of labels. Oh, you're a Baptist, or you're a Pentecostal, or you're a evangelical, or you're a Protestant. These words, sometimes that they can be fine. Sometimes they can carry a huge amount of weight, and you're just stuck. I'm a Baptist. I believe everything every other Baptist believes, or I'm a Pentecostal. Because you believe in that God can heal. Oh, you're Benny Hinn. You're these type of labels. You've got to be very careful how you get labeled, and so that's one of the things that I've oftentimes talked about, is the obsession that the modern Bible industrial complex has with labeling people as onlyists, King James onlyists, TR onlyists, all this sort of stuff. Where at the end of the day, it's like, I think yes, people can have labels, but when it's just a label to throw you into a camp, it's sort of like, oh, you're like, oftentimes even in politics, you'll say something and people will say, oh, you're a Democrat, or you're a Republican. Here in Australia, it's like a Labor and Liberal. Okay, and Liberals actually, supposedly the Conservative Party, but they're called Liberals. But it's quite weird. It's strange. If you just have your own point of view, if you start talking about someone like Donald Trump and just saying, look, I don't like him. Oh, what? You're a Democrat, and then you're like, oh, I don't like Biden. Oh, what? You're a Republican. You're like, you can hate both of them, or you can like both of them. It doesn't mean you're in either camp. And this is the problem with society. We're thrown into these camps. And so the King James error debate that's on the title here, that was brought up. And so TurretinFan sort of said, I know you don't like being called King James only. And I said, look, I actually don't mind. But at the end of the day, it's usually when contras say it, because I'm King James only in a sense where I believe all the words of God are found in the King James Bible. The underlying Greek text of the King James Bible, the Textus Receptus, is akin to the English. So it's sort of like, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You're just explaining it in a different way. You're explaining it in a different language. We have that text in Latin as well, the text of Beza. There might be a few places where it needs emendation to match up with the King James exactly, but you're probably looking at, about 20 places, I guess, the same in the Latin. And so I said to Donnie, I said, look, keep the King James only label. It just attracts a bigger crowd, But he's gone with King James error debate on this one. So it must have sort of hit home a little bit, and he's gone, well, I don't want to say King James only. Now, one of the things is when I first started doing the debate circuit, people just labeled me King James only because I was defending the Textus Receptus. Well, see, James White, in his labeling system, he has 5 different types of King James onlyism, including your grandma sitting on the couch reading a King James Bible. She's an onlyist as well, including majority text people. They're onlyists as well, King James onlyists, including TR preferred people, including TR only people, and King James only people. They're all just King James only. It's just bad categories. James White just didn't. Well, he probably deliberately did that. It's just sort of like, okay, here's a list of cults. If you don't believe in the pre-trib rapture, or if you do believe in the pre-trib rapture, you're in a cult. Sort of thing. And it's like, I'm with the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, and the. Why would I be thrown into that? Like something so bad, And so if you just defend the King James, you usually just thrown under the Ruckman bus. Okay, so that happened with James White. He had a forum, and I jumped on his forum and I started chatting about Easter. This is back in about 2009, and I actually it would have been earlier than that, probably about 2007. So I'd written my article in 2005, and I thought that James White would actually be interested in what I had to say, because I had listened to a lot of dividing line stuff, and I was mostly listening to Dave Hunt's material. So him and Dave Hunt had done some stuff in the 90s. Then they'd sort of parted ways over the Calvinism issue. And James White was, just constantly after that, just sort of berating Dave Hunt, and sort of, because in one of the debates he said, look, I don't know that much about the Reformers, I know about the Bible. And he's like, it just became this huge thing, which probably wasn't the smartest debate move to talk about when you're debating about something like Calvinism. You've got to know the topic and what, who Calvin is and all that. But at the end of the day, I thought James White will be open to listening to my understanding about Easter. So I jumped on his forum and I politely asked him. I said, James, I have a view of Easter which I don't think you might have heard. And he said, well, okay, well, explain it. And I said, am I able to explain it without getting booted? And he said, yeah, that's fine. No worries. And so I put forward that Easter means resurrection etymologically through the German Oster and through that link to Auferstehung. And so Auferstehung meaning resurrection. So I said that to him, and straight away he said, you're a Ruckmanite. And I was like, no. And so I'd written my article by then, and so I sent him a link to it, because the first chapter I say that I'm not a Ruckmanite. And so straight away he said I was a Ruckmanite. And then anything I said after that, he was like, just sort of like, you're an idiot. And all these fanboys, because it was just him and all these fanboys in this chat group. It was his own personal AO Min chat group sort of thing. And so they just all ganged up on me and were just like, look at this idiot. Yeah, what a fool, blah, blah, blah. And then they booted me. But I wanted to see what they actually said. Like, even if they had criticisms, I wanted to know them. And so I just signed, you could just sign in under any name. So I signed in under a different name, and I was just sort of like, any thoughts on the Easter thing, And they were like, he's coming back in under another name. What a psycho, and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, man, I thought these apologists would be into chatting about the Bible, especially if I politely asked and said, can I offer my opinion? They were just like, just throwing mud and just throwing sand. And so, that was my first ever experience with James White. He said I was a Ruckmanite straight out, and on the topic of Easter, which is quite amazing. So here we have the Greek word Pascha. So we have the Easter debate. Is Easter the wrong translation? So this is going to be in Standing for Truth. So this is going to be in Australian time. So don't follow this if you're in America or UK or whatever. So April the 12th. So I'm going to be doing that April the 12th. I think it's at about 11 o'clock. Yeah, live in 5 days, April 12th at 11 o'clock. So that's my time here in Australia. So it'll be different for you guys. Okay, so Red Headliner says, hey, Nick, have a blessed Easter. Glad to finally catch a live stream again. He is risen, absolutely. Now, one of the things was when I first became a Christian, I was given a Vine's dictionary and a Strong's, and anything that would help aid my studies, I just got into. And so the more books you had, the more prepared you were, sort of thing. And after a while, I was an avid street preacher. I would street preach every day. So I would go downtown street preach. It got to the point where the pastor of the church I was in felt that I was actually doing too much. And he sort of felt that maybe I'm burning people. But I wasn't. There was actually a lot of people getting saved. And looking back, he shouldn't have put a blanket over what I was doing. He was just like, look, just do it like once a week sort of thing. It was like, oh, okay. And so I stopped doing that. And then after that, not that many people got saved after that. It was just sort of like, why would you stop someone evangelizing? Well, at least send me to another town, or, I'm on fire, So anyway, I remember it was about 2001. So I've been a Christian for about 6 years. And I was out handing out invitations to an Easter service, okay? And there was a girl walked past, and I said, do you want to come out to an Easter service? She said, why would I go to a church and learn about a pagan festival? And I was sort of taken aback, but I actually said, "You're correct," because I thought it was a pagan festival too, but I hadn't really thought about it that much. And I was like, "Yeah, you're correct," and it just sort of jarred me because I was like, I didn't really have a proper answer. I just had, and usually what I've found, one of the best tools to evangelism is actually agreeing with people when they're correct, and don't just fight against them the whole time. I've had people come up screaming at me saying, the church is full of pedophiles, the church has done this. And I'm like, I agree with you 100%. Well, why are you yelling at me? And they're like, well, what do you mean you agree? And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't have anything to do with those churches. We expose those churches. We expose the corruption in the Roman Catholic Church. I've exposed Hillsong. We don't have anything to do with these groups. And then they're like, wow, they're on your side, and they shake your hand, and they're like, well, so what are you into? And it just opens up for a witness. So when this girl said it's a pagan festival, my mind just defaulted to that. I was like, she's right. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And she walked off. And so the following Sunday, the pastor of the church at the time, he asked a question. He said, does anyone know what Easter means? And I put my hand up high and I said, Easter is a pagan festival. And he sort of had the same thing. He went, correct. And I was just sort of like, this is weird. This is interesting. Where do I go with this? So that's about 2001. And at the time, I was reading the New King James. I had most of my studies were in the Old King James. I was reading the New King James, and I've been a Christian for about 6 years. And most of the time, I just thought that the New King James was just an update of the King James, just updated language. That's what I thought. I didn't know there were so many other issues. Because when you're just engulfed in just reading one particular version and you're not really always checking with the Old King James or anything like that, you just think, oh, it's the same. And that's why sometimes when modern versionists, they come along and say, oh, the ESV is not that much different. And it's like, no, it's heaps different. Do a comparative study, get it side by side, each verse going through, or just get the lists where there's differences and go through them. So anyway, so what happened was I started to think I should really do an in-depth study on Easter. And so I started searching around, and I found a King James only forum with Will Kinney on it and another guy called Scott Jones. And so Scott Jones had written an article in 2001 on whether it was Easter or Passover. And this just opened my eyes, not only to the fact that Easter was not a pagan festival, and not only to the fact that it was entirely a Christian festival, but also to the fact that this King James only guy was brilliant. I was just gobsmacked. I was like, this guy is explaining this in a way which I'm envious of. I want to be like that. I want to have that level of scholarship. And so I started reading all of his material on his page. I started Google searching him and finding him in different groups, chatting. And so I followed him, and he had a page called lamblion.net. So I'm going to get that up for you guys here. Now, lamblion.net is down. He pulled it down. And so I'm just going to go to Wayback Machine. Which is archive.org. But if you just type in Wayback Machine, now if you don't know about this, it's a great site. So Bold as a Lion, good evening, Nick. Good evening, Bold as a Lion. So if you go up the top here, now lamblion.net, I've already got it in the history. So let's go there. Still loading up. And so probably, I think it was from about 2015 or something like that, he pulled the website down. So all the rest of that is just rubbish. But The peak of it, where there was some very, very good articles, is about 2011. But let's go back early to the earliest stages of 2001, and we'll just see if his Easter article is up there then, because this would have been probably the one that I would have read. I'm not sure why that one's not clicking. Let's go to the next year. There we go. That's better. So 2002. So, okay, so he has articles. And he was a Calvinist. So I didn't necessarily agree with everything that he was saying. But when it came to the issue of textual criticism, this was very brilliant. Yeah, so here we have this article, Easter or Passover. Now, okay. It's a very well-written article. Now, Scott Jones wrote in a way where if you sort of didn't agree with what he would consider truth, you were sort of, your eyes weren't opened, you were dumb, and you're probably on your way to hell. And so it was sort of, some of it's quite confronting like that. But I use that type of language myself nowadays. And so I read through this article, and I was shocked that he was making claims that Easter was not a pagan festival. That was the first thing that really hit me, because that was the issue that I was dealing with. And so after going through that, I was like, it's not a pagan festival. Wow. And so I wrote my own article. And my first article is here. If you go to easterau.com, just one word, Easter and AU on the end of it, and .com. It goes to this website here, which I've made, and I've put my two videos. And so this first video, I think was made in like 2008 or something like that, 2009. And this second video, I made it in 2015 while I was in Pakistan. So basically, I just sort of go through, I didn't want to just gut this material, okay? But there were certain aspects of it that I wanted to highlight and that I wanted to prove. And so this it started off as a study, and then I ended up just writing this huge article on it. Well, not huge, but it was at the time it was quite lengthy for me, and I'd never written any academic article ever, and I didn't even have any footnotes or anything. And so when you actually go through these footnotes, someone else put these in because it appeared in a magazine. And so I failed high school. I didn't care about reading too much. And so when I became a Christian, I did read. I had read quite a lot of books before I became a Christian. But after I became a Christian, it was just a new level where I was just reading. And I read through, one of the first books that I ever read was Think Big by Carson, that Seventh-day Adventist guy. I didn't know he was a Sebi at the time. And in that book, he doesn't really mention it. He mentions something about the Sabbath. And I was like, what? Is he a Sebi? But he says in that if you read 2 books a week, you can pretty much learn anything. You can become a master at anything. And so I started doing that and reading 2 books a week and going through lots of different things. And so that was leading me to these type of studies. And so all these references, I should really go through and clean these up. But these were written down by someone else. So for a 2007 magazine that came out in Australia. And so that's sort of where this concept became quite popular. And so I went through the dominant strength of English. English has become the dominant world language, explaining that. Then I just explained how Hebrew Pesach became Greek Pascha, and just how it was sort of transliterated in the Greek. and then the Latin Bible. And so you're just sort of going through this progression, and then to Wycliffe. Now, back in 2005, there wasn't that much information on the internet about the Bible. Now, there's so much nowadays. I mean, if you were just to ask ChatGPT to give you a list of Bibles that include Easter, it would just give you everything. But back in the day, most of the time you're just dealing with books. I mean, I'm surfing the internet looking for things. And so it was just sort of considered that Wycliffe was the first English Bible, but then there were the Anglo-Saxon Bibles. And so that's where a book like Bryan Ross's, and so I'm just going to show you the cover of that. So this is, I got the book, and with the book they gave me the PDF as well. They sent me that. So the first day that it came on the market, I grabbed this because at the time I was writing a book. I announced that I was going to write a book on Easter, a definitive book on Easter, and it was called Why We Should Not Pass Over Easter. And then this book came out, Don't Pass Over Easter, and it was about Easter. I'm like, I really did feel at the time it was just sort of like something copied. That was in 2020. So my Easter book, I think it's 168 pages at the moment, and since this book came out, I sort of got a bit deflated about it. I just left it. I just went, I just can't be, I'll just let that run. I'll just work on some other projects for a while. But so anyway, I don't want to show you everything in this book, but this would probably be enough, like for a Amazon quick look at it. So it's introduction. Standard defense of Acts 12:4, is Easter pagan? And so he goes through the Easter pagan thing. So that's one of the main things that we have come against. Now, I had not been involved with King James onlyism at all, really. And so before I'd written this type of article, so I didn't read through GIP. I didn't read through Jack Mormon, didn't go through D.A. Waite. So to me, it was just sort of like, oh, everyone sort of thinks it's pagan. Because most of the people that I was looking at James White stuff, I was looking just at everything, but I thought it was pagan too. So it was just sort of like it was just a mindset back then that everyone thought it was pagan. And the only person I could really find that was saying it's not pagan was a King James only guy. To me, that spoke volumes. I was like, this King James only guy's got it. And so that one of the reasons why I wrote this article was because when I would share the Easter article, people, they go, oh, he's a King James only guy. And I'd be like, yeah, but can't you see through that? Can't you just look at the information and go, yeah, that's really good information? They were just like, he's a King James only guy. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote my own article on it, because I wasn't a King James only guy. Now I do King James only debates, and I wanted people to know this truth. So I thought, well, I don't want to just steal his stuff, So I went through and made my own article, talking about Tyndale, going in depth about Tyndale. But then there's little bits of information that do come from Scott Jones. And so where it's talking about, that's actually under the Martin Luther one, where it talks about here. The English word Easter, now I'll just enlarge on that. So let's go to, the English word Easter is of German Saxon origin and not Babylonian, as Alexander Hislop falsely claimed. And as we shall see later, the German equivalent is Oster. Okay, Ostern, being the modern day correspondent, is related to Ost, which means the rising of the sun, or simply in English, east. Oster comes from the Old Teutonic Oferstehen, which means resurrection, which in the older Teutonic form comes from two words. So it should say Erster there. It's actually a typo that I haven't fixed. A guy pointed that out on Twitter about a year ago. He said it should say Erster, not Esther. So Erster meaning first, so we can hear Erster, firster, sort of thing. Erster meaning first, and Stehen meaning to stand. It's from the Old Teutonic. These two words combine to form Österhen, which is the old German form of Försterhen, the modern-day German word for resurrection. The English Easter and German Oster go hand in hand. So when I was studying this Easter article, it was I was learning about etymology. I was learning about the history of the Bible. I mean, I knew a fair bit, but I was going back to German and going back to French words, going back to Teutonic words. That was all new to me. So, Tyndale, talking about Tyndale, then some early English examples. Now, if we go through Bryan Ross's book, he's got quite a lot of English examples. And so some of these, some of these examples are perfectly fine. But when we go through like the early biblical examples, I wouldn't rely on these. So where I've got, Passover appears 14 times, Esther appears 15 times. Some of these are actually not correct because, back in 2005 when I wrote the article, just this sort of stuff just wasn't available to just go to, a site like Bibles Online and go, oh, cool, I'm just going to look up the Matthew's Bible. I mean, how long did that take? 1 second to search. And so, we can just jump on the Matthew's Bible, we can search through it. And oftentimes people have gone through and done these and they've got lists of words. And so that's one of the things that Bryan Ross has. And when I was going through this, I was getting this information from like, Yahoo forums. Someone's written about Easter and they're saying, oh, well, the Great Bible uses it this many times. And I'm trying to work out how I can figure that out and trying to search for it. And I mean, when the internet first started, we were looking for the Textus Receptus, the Greek. And so I think it was Kirk DeVitro put the Textus Receptus online. And he didn't use any, breathing points or, any symbols over the letters, and we wanted everything because to us it was like jots and tittles, every little bit matters, So, we had the TR, but it was Scrivener's, but it didn't have any of those identifying marks, rough breathing and smooth breathing, and commas and things like that. And so, we were oftentimes scouring the internet looking for this type of thing. Or if we copied and pasted from that, we would add our own little ones in Adobe Illustrator and, doing all that sort of stuff. So, nowadays it's just everything's just so accessible. So I probably have a few things wrong on the Matthew's Bible, Great Bible. And so I'd say, the Bishop's Bible, I'm pretty sure I got that information absolutely correct. Now, some of this might be correct, but some of it might be wrong. I would have to go through and exhaustively go through it. Now, I did have a friend of mine go through and he took screenshots of everywhere, every available English Bible has Easter in it. So in the Matthew's Bible, the Great Bible, Geneva Bible, etc. And so he took screenshots of everywhere it says Passover and everywhere it says Easter. And so I have that in my records. So it was mostly so I could double check. And so it seems like that's the type of word that Bryan Ross has done. But then again, when I read Bryan Ross's book, he's actually going with the new Oxford English Dictionary, which I don't agree with some of the definitions there. The older printed edition, the original Oxford English Dictionary, that's the one that I was going with. And that's now available freely on archive. So you can look up the Oxford English Dictionary. So, so going through the King James, the Greek word Pascha appears 29 times in the Greek New Testament. In 28 of those times, it's referring to the Old Testament Passover. But in Acts chapter 12, verse 4, it's referring to the New Testament celebration, which is the Lord's Supper. Now, that the understanding that I got from studying this. Now, at the time, I read everything that I could get my hands on Easter. So it was just like a year-long sort of project. Every time I'd jump in front of a computer, it was like, okay, I'll look up Easter things and read through forums and go ask questions and, do word studies. And it just got to the place where this article just appeared from that. And now this has become quite controversial, where I guess I did bring it up here. I was leaving little puppy feet for this. But see, my understanding is from all my studies of Easter, my understanding is the Passover was a yearly celebration, okay? Jesus, on the 14th of Nisan, on the Wednesday night, he initiated the Lord's Supper and said, do this in remembrance of me. In other words, you don't have to kill a lamb anymore. You don't have to do all that sort of stuff. Do this in remembrance of me. Take the cup and, have the bread and do the Lord's Supper. So that's described in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 as well. And so for me, all my studies pointed to this being a yearly celebration. Now, I was in a church that didn't have communion regularly. And just every now and then, it's sort of like you have Christmas. Oh, let's do communion, or sorry, just cut out there. Or Easter would be a time where you had communion, but there was really no sort of link like, oh, this is what the Bible says to do, and we're going outside of that. And so coming from that type of perspective, I guess I wasn't sort of trapped in that mindset where, it has to be every week, because there are churches like that. It has to be every week or you're a blasphemer, sort of thing. I know the Roman Catholic Church is very strict on that. And then you go through Anglicanism, but there are other churches that'll do it once a month. And it's like, well, why once a month? Well, where are you getting this from? And oftentimes, it comes down to the word often, oft. As oft as you do this. But I did find a word the other day in the King James that said as often as you do this sort of thing, but it was talking about something that was set in concrete, like a yearly type of thing. But these are all the studies, this type of material. Every time I think about something that could relate to Easter, I'm putting it down. So that's why I was writing a book, because this was written in 2005. There was a lot of backlash against this, but there was also a lot of agreement with this. But I'll just keep going through this article and I'll explain where this went. Okay. So, so the whole issue of Easter or the Lord's Supper only being a yearly thing, it was sort of overlooked in all these articles, and I didn't really want it to be a main focus because it was sort of like a side issue. Another side issue is like the day that Jesus died. Now, I've become completely convinced that Jesus died on the Thursday. And so I know that, say, Chuck Missler and a bunch of other guys, they were like, oh, it's Wednesday. Even the guy who printed this article in his magazine, he was a Wednesday guy. But I just can't see the Friday. It's only got 2 nights. It clearly says 3 days and 3 nights. If you got, he died on a Friday, Friday night, Saturday night, it's just 2 nights. It just doesn't, the math just doesn't work. And so but that would be another like side issue, that's come up. And also the timing of the 70th week of Daniel. And there's so much that comes out of this, because we're talking about the crux of when the Old Testament became the New Testament, or not the Old Testament became the New Testament, but the Old Testament became redundant. The New Testament replaced the Old Testament in a sense of the covenant that we're in. And so 1 minute you're in the old, next minute you're in the new, and it's like one is redundant, one is active now. And so you're talking about that period of time. So you're talking about the whole concept of understanding what would be labeled today dispensationalism. And I know there's hyper dispensationalists and all sorts of, some people, you say, oh, I'm a dispensationalist. They're like, why do you think about Israel? Or they just go straight to Israel. And it's like, that even like Theodore Beza was like, you've got to understand the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I mean, that's just very basic sort of stuff. But where was I going with that? Okay, so like the Lord's Supper. So it wasn't really an issue that I wanted to bring up too much, but I sort of felt that it could segue onto that later on, which I guess, will probably happen. TurretinFan has locked onto this. And he's basically saying, that I'm claiming that Easter only is the only time they did the Lord's Supper. I mean, to me, that just makes sense biblically, it makes sense historically as well. But then later on, because of, it's like, okay, we can do this every week sort of thing. And the Roman Catholics, with their obsession with the Eucharist, and the Greek Orthodox Church, it just became just something that everyone just did every week. And so if you do it every week, I haven't got a problem with that. It's like, I've been in a church that did it every week. And for me, it was fascinating, because I'd come from a church that hardly did it at all, just sort of randomly. And it's like, oh, we're doing that now. And you sort of feel a bit religious, like, oh, this feels really Catholic-y, are we sure we're supposed to do this sort of thing? And then I did my Easter study, and I was like, okay, well, it should be done at Easter. And I've noticed that in that denomination that I was in, they mostly do it on Easter now. It's probably due to my influence just on this one thing. But in the other church that I was in, they were doing it every week. And so and every week they get a different speaker from the church to get up and talk about it. And so you'd have 5 minutes, get up there and talk about a little thing about Jesus, and talk about the blood of Christ, or the body, or whatever, talk about the cross, or maybe a story or something like that. And so it was fascinating to me to go through this and say, and to go, okay, well, having the mindset that I had to sit in a church for, I think I was in there for probably about 4 or 5 years. And so that would be 200 times that I sat through a communion. And I'm watching it, thinking about it, but also listening to every time it's talking about the cross, every time it's talking about the blood of Jesus, which really amazingly, in the other church that I was in that didn't really preach about all that sort of, didn't do communion, they used to do altar calls at the end, every head bowed, every eye closed, and, you feel bad, put your hand up, sort of thing. If you had visitors there, they would, do a full altar call. But then it was like, if you're backslidden, come down the front and all that. But I found that then they were talking about the blood, the cross, all the communion features then. It was sort of like a weird transition to have it every time we went to church. At the end, every head bowed, and you're just sort of thinking about it then. But with this other church, it was like every Sunday morning, it was like thinking about that sort of stuff, specifically at the beginning of the service. And so, thinking about all that, going through all that, and thinking, what day should we do it? What day biblically should we do it? And to me, it just made sense that it was a yearly thing. And so, and to read 1 Corinthians chapter 11 as a yearly festival, that's why it was a massive feast. That's why they're saying, how come some of you are, you've already eaten, some of you are bringing food, people who don't have anything, they're tripping out because everyone else is eating food and they're not. Some go hungry, and it's saying it's like it's a big party, which in a sense that's sort of what the Pascha was. It was a massive celebration. It was the carryover of the Old Testament Pascha of the Passover into the early church. And so to me it makes sense if you read through 1 Corinthians 11. Just read through it and go, okay, is this talking about a yearly or a weekly? Without the church, mindset, the church history being in the background, screaming out, saying it has to be every week. It has to be every week, because you go to churches where it's once a month, and it's like, okay, so how do you support that? Well, I don't know. You go to where it's once a week. How do you support that? I don't know. And you go to a church where it's like, well, they do it like once a year or something. It's like, how do you support that? And it's like, well, it's because the Passover was a yearly thing. It's because Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. In the place of the Passover, the Old Testament Pascha became the New Testament Pascha. And there's quite a lot of defense for that. So that's where I've come to in my position. Now, some of you probably already have your rocks out, ready to stone me to death. But that is just like a side issue, for me. It's like the day that Jesus died. If you think Jesus died on Wednesday, it's like, I just think you're not really good at maths. But I'm like, okay, well, and there's plenty of, this is just one thing that I've gone down and sort of discovered a bunch of things. There's plenty of things where I'm sure that you are an expert on that I'm not. And you could get me on the fine details. And I'm like, oh, I guess, yeah, I do that because it's a traditional thing to do. And, whoops, or whatever. And, but the communion thing, the Eucharist thing is a huge thing. Because in some churches, like when you say, if you watch Wretched Radio with Todd Friel, I was watching his expose of the Osprey revival, and he was saying what you need to do is get back to the basics: read your Bible, pray, attend church, do communion. And I'm thinking it's become, for some churches, it's a sacrament. It's a full sacrament. It's like going to church. It's like reading your Bible. It's a huge thing. And so I understand I can be touching some people's sore spot there. Anyway, I don't want to just make it all about that. Let's talk more about Easter. So Christ had become the Lamb of God and replaced the Passover sacrifice with the new covenant in his blood. So, yeah, going through all that. And talking about the silliness of Easter being a pagan festival, where Tyndale has, Christ, our Easter Lamb, is sacrificed for us. If anyone in the Reformation period, they all knew about Bede. They all knew about his one sentence that said that there was a month named after a goddess called Yosta. Okay, maybe that's true. Okay, maybe there was a goddess called Yosta. But just because you call a month after it doesn't mean anything else. We say, Thursday, it's named after Thor. And it's like, do we have, just on Thursday, do we have anything to do with Thor? Does that mean that the people who were naming it Thor's Day, were they saying that we have to do anything on Thursday to do with him? Does that mean that everyone was worshipping him? What do we read into that? And that's the problem, is people are reading into Bede so much, where I think that in my third article, which I will touch on, I do go through that a little bit. So maybe I should save that discussion for when we get there. So I just want to keep skipping through this. So then I go through Hislop's clumsy scholarship, and so most people have come full circle. Like let's just look, for example. I'm just going to go to my Facebook. So I'm going to show you my Facebook here. So let's go to Wes Huff. Okay. So this guy is an apologist in Canada. Okay. And so, he's got some interesting things. Now, he is a critical text guy. Okay. So, but he had recently, I was actually going to put that picture in my book because I thought it was quite funny. He had recently put up a thing on Easter. Here, Easter is not a pagan holiday. Okay, so he's got this picture. Celebrating the death and resurrection of Jesus is a long-standing Christian tradition spanning over a millennia. Although there has clearly been growth, law, and traditions added to modern practice of the holiday, the accusations of substantial pagan roots falls apart under historical inspection. All traditional pagan associations with connection with Easter, when truly put under the microscope, turn out themselves to be more fiction than fact. Now, I don't know anyone who was saying that Easter was not a pagan festival except for Scott Jones back in 2001. And then I found Will Kinney. He was saying the same thing and agreeing with Scott Jones. And then I wrote my article, and then KJV Today. KJV Today author. He was contacting me, and we were helping each other with Easter articles that we were doing. And because we were both part of the Textus Receptus group that I ran on Facebook, which has about 7,500 people in it, we would often bring up Easter because it was just my issue, my topic. Every year I'm bringing it up, but also just I'm researching, I'm just putting more and more information, and lots of people were coming on that page and debating against what I was saying. So, which is why it became like a very strong conviction in me, because once you've debated it, you're like, well, actually, no, I'm right there. And so that becomes, and you know the arguments. People are throwing all sorts of arguments, and the arguments that are getting thrown around today, probably 10 years ago, I wouldn't have answered them as properly, but now I can answer them very well, I think. So we have this claim, that it's related to Ishtar or Ostara. So this is, Wes Huff, he's going through this, just sort of saying these things. And look, even here, I put this on yesterday. I proved James, and I keep reminding them, James White believes that Easter is a pagan festival. That's what he says in his book. Okay. I disproved James White's notion of a pagan Easter in 2005 with my article, Why We Should Not Pass Over Easter. So I put it there. But usually I put stuff like that there, but he doesn't. It's a bit of a bait. It's a bit of a, I'm trying to draw him into a conversation to say, oh, okay, that's interesting. How did you come to that understanding? Because in my understanding, with everyone saying Easter is a pagan festival, that was the main claim that would come against the King James insertion of Easter there. Like James White was just like, well, it's a pagan holiday, so why would they put a pagan holiday in there? It's anachronistic sort of thing. And now I understand that Jack Mormon, D.A. Waite, and most of these other people who are considered King James only, they had the pagan thing as well, which I'll touch on. But to me, it's sort of like these guys have come full circle, probably because of the efforts of people like me, Will Kenny, KJV today, and a lot of other people who came full circle on this issue, who were King James guys. And like I said, one of the main reasons why I wrote my article was so I could make it palatable for people. So it was coming from a non-King James only perspective, because I wasn't King James only then. I was reading the New King James, and then James White had already called me a Ruckmanite by now, and it's like, oh, okay, so that's pretty weird. So anyway, you go through Hislop's stuff. It's just strange. He's just saying Easter sounds like Ishtar, so it must be pagan. Okay, so even on the critical text side, like I said, people like Wes Huff, even Mark Ward. I'm pretty sure Mark Ward. Now let's just search for that. Mark Ward, Easter pagan. Now he might have done an article on it. Now he has done an article on it, and I've read it, and so I'm not sure why I'm saying he might have done an article on it, because I know that he's done an article on it. That's why I'm looking it up. Is Easter a pagan holiday? Some say yes, but is it really? So this is in March 2021. I mean, so where are these guys getting this idea? Now, you can get this idea apart from King James only people, but it's like, I dare say that that's where they're getting this from. They've probably gone through my videos and gone, that makes sense. And doing the same thing that I did. I don't want to be associated with King James only, so I'll write my own article on it. And that's exactly what I did. We're not sure that Easter is a pagan word. Okay, Oxford English Dictionary. The words mean what we use them to mean. Yeah, he even says Thursday. And I mean, I've been saying that for years. I think I even say that in my third article, which would be sort of definitive proof that he sort of copied from my article, I guess, which is fine. I mean, I'm open to someone like Mark Ward, reading through my stuff and going, oh, okay, I can understand that. But the thing is, he gets on his program and says he's never learned anything from a King James onlyist. sort of thing. Homophones. Wonder if I mentioned Thursday. No. But I'll probably mention week. Yeah. First day of the week. Okay. Friday means day of fridge. Fridge being the Norse goddess. Wednesday, Saturday. So I do talk about those days. So he's picked Thursday. Okay. Word fights distract us from the substantive issues. Not really. They can bring us to truth. Easter, Christ's true physical resurrection, lies at the heart of the Christian faith. Okay. Is the word Easter in the Bible? Now, that was the other one that he wrote, saying that it doesn't appear in the Logos Bible software. It's like they just have this gap. The word Easter does appear once in the Bible, only once, and only in one translation. No, that's not the history of that word. Wonder how old this is. 2016. Yeah, so this is before he's done authorized. So here we have Easter, and they just have a dot here, which they have Pascha, and they've got Passover. Easter is just sort of like an aberration, probably because they think it's a pagan festival. That's usually why. Because most dictionaries say it's a pagan festival, So the little dot is called a null. It means that Easter isn't marked as a translation of anything in the Greek. Did the translators just stick Easter in there randomly? No. Note there is another null symbol in the surface English text row. Blah, blah, blah. So he's got an article on there. But if he didn't really hate the King James guys so much, which I'm apparently a Ruckmanite according to him, he would probably do well to reference my work. Okay, which we'll go through who has referenced my work and who has gone through it and learned from it. Because I did feel that I found this in King James only land and brought it into the public sphere. And a lot of people benefited from it. But then were like, after a while, I was labeled a King James only. So they're like, oh, we can't have anything to do with him. You know what I mean? It's so weird. And I've mentioned this many times about Peter Gurry. Like, I was on this Facebook chat and or Facebook forum, and we were talking about a different topic, and I said, look, you're straining at a gnat and you're swallowing a camel. And he said, well, I'm not doing that. And he said, even what you just said, straining at a gnat, that's not the correct reading. It should be straining out a gnat. And I said, no, that's probably what Scrivener had in his paragraph Bible in 1873, but that's not correct, etc. And so I started going through it, and he started doubling down, saying, no, I was completely wrong. So I knew James Snap had done an article on it. So I thought this would be a great little trap for him. What I'll do, I'll just reference everything from James Snap's site and not say where I got it from. So I was like, well, what about this? And I could have done it with Will Kinney. I could have done it with anyone else who's done articles on this. But I thought I'll do it specifically from James Snap's site because they respect him because he's not an absolutist, I guess. Copied and pasted stuff. And he's like, no, wrong. Copied and pasted more stuff. Not wrong. But I just kept going through it. Not wrong. And then in the end, James Snap jumped on there and he said, actually, Nick's correct here. And he put a link to his website. And James got a full apology. I'm really sorry, James. I didn't realize this and that. Okay, well, that's really interesting. Thank you very much for that information. Not like, oh, Nick, you're correct. And also, doesn't that show you that people they have a mindset? Oh, the guy's a King James only. That's why people in debates like James White, people, like Gary or whatever, they purposely demonize the other side. People like Mark Ward do this. they're like, these other people over here, that they've got low IQ, so don't listen to anything they're saying. They're toxic, so don't listen to them. They're insane. So, you imagine if you were about to do the speech of your life, and before you got up there, you're in the back room and you don't even know what they're saying on the mic, and they're like, okay, so we've got Bob, he's going to come up. Now, I just want to tell you guys, Bob is insane. Bob bashes his wife. Bob is the cause of all the problems in North Korea. Bob kills children, blah, blah. And then, so here you go, Bob. How many people are going to, even if you just have 30-40% of people going, well, I don't want to listen to Bob, it's tainted everything. And this is what anti King James people like James White do. This is pretty much all they do now in their debates, is they just sit there going, well, these people are crazy, these people are dumb, these people are related to snake handlers, and they're a cult, and Ruckman, and just saying all this stuff that's just not even true. I mean, when I wrote this article, I don't think I've even listened to one of Ruckman's sermons. Hardly even knew who he was. I probably knew way more about Ruckman from James White than ever listening to Ruckman at all. But I was a Ruckmanite. It's so dumb. It's the dumbest pigeonholing thing ever. Anyway, so got a few people in the chat. Helge says, God Pascare, alle sammen. Happy Easter, everybody. Happy Easter, Helge. Ahana, gratia ex pax omnibus. Okay, I'm not really sure what that means, but it sounds very fancy. Onsdag, Wednesday in Norway, means Odin's Day. Yeah, I guess you're worshipping Odin there, because the days are evil. Joke. So, yeah, the days are evil. Yeah, I just got it. Very good, very good. That's a good pun, actually. I've got to write that down and use that. That would make a good title. I'm gonna write that down. Okay, where's a notepad? Because the days are evil. That'll make a good chapter title. Okay, that's for later. Now, yeah, so I've got Jehovah initiated Easter, not pagan. So one of the articles that Scott Jones has was Jehovah. The first article he has, and he clearly explains why Jehovah is the divine name. And he has a chart, this chart, Jehoahaz, and then he has Joahaz, Jehoshaphat became Josaphat. And so this was in the biblical record. So the theophoric name. So the issue that I brought up in my Revelation 16:5 book and in other videos, this was written in 2001. So I'm reading through this going, man, this is gold. This is really good. And so I wanted to bring his material into the public arena and get people talking about this. Okay. So that's why I'm saying Jehovah initiated, because I wanted this article that I wrote to have these tiny little puppy feet that could lead on to other things. Not just saying the Lord initiated it, Jehovah initiated. So, is that the correct way to say it? It's like, well, as you're mentioning that, sort of like sneaking these things in like an Amway salesman, it's like, well, you're holding that jar of peanut butter there. Do you realize that with Amway, you can get it for $2 cheaper and all that? I was trying to do that with this article. I'm like, Jehovah, and I've got the Lord's Supper there, and, And I also do mention that Jesus died on a Thursday, I think, here. I think I do. Maybe it's in my second article. Yeah. So, yeah, I was pretty specific here. With Easter Sunday being Resurrection Sunday, representing the 17th of Nisan, Good Friday being the date, which is a representation of the 14th of Nisan, although in 32 AD, that's another thing, because I'm just It's not just like a random. Wikipedia says, I'm like 32 is the year. The day Jesus died was a Thursday, so I specifically put that in to have these little debates later. Okay, so yeah, my first article. Hislop's claims based merely on phonetics. Jehovah initiated Easter, not pagans. And this was interesting too. Ralph Woodrow, he used to write sort of Hislop type books. And so he pointed out that Hislop theorized that Nimrod, Adonis, Apollo, Attis, Beelzebub, Bacchus, all those, Woden, they were all basically the same person. And I wrote, with these type of generalizations, one must seriously consider whether Hislop's book has any redeeming qualities at all. Then I go through the King James translators, which you guys will be very familiar with. Talking about Lancelot Andrews, speaking 15 European languages. He actually spoke another 6 languages that had that were ancient, and going through Henry Saville, John Boyce, etc. And then talking about modern versions. I bring up the KJV 21st century. It has Easter, the Third Millennium Bible. Okay, and then so in summary and conclusion, so this is where if I was to rewrite this, I would have this other little issue that I would have to bring up those puppy feet of other arguments that I want to have in the future. I believe that the word Easter should be resurrected, no pun intended, from its current state in modern translations, dictionaries, and our personal worship. The celebration of Easter should be a time of jubilation, not to talk about myths, fables, and old wives' tales. Just as the Jews remembered the Passover, so too should Christians remember Christ at communion. So next time you break the bread and drink, I should have said, instead of the wine, I should have said the grape juice, which would have fired shots. But I guess for me, wine was just not alcoholic wine. But now I've come to the point where I'm very staunch on that. And so that would be something, if I could go back in a time machine and tell myself to, change that word to grape juice, but that probably would have sparked a whole bunch of arguments. And I didn't want to turn people off with my side issues because I wanted to get the main thing across. Okay. So summary and conclusion. And then I was, linked to Scott Jones' article, of course, but I think people just went to Scott Jones's article and went, King James only. Okay, let's just skip that. Trinitarian Bible Society. Oh, okay, that they're okay. See, back maybe 20 years ago, they were still considered, they're for the Textus Receptus sort of thing, and not, they're just King James only cultists, like Mark Ward's trying to bring out. And these people are just getting slandered and demonized. And then I had Easter by Will Kinney. And so most people had no idea who Will Kinney is, or who Will Kinney was back then, except for he was on a few forums and stuff. So anyway, that's my first article. So in my second article, I started off by going through the New King James. Okay. So now it's actually not written in this article, but I do have it as, now I'm going to type in why we should not Passover, Easter, and see what comes up. My site, YouTube, Tapper Talk. Actually, that would be interesting because they're anti-King James guys, or all the guys who hate Stephen Avery and me. Okay, yeah. So this is in, look, joined 2004, last active 2010. So this is in 2010. I recently made a video about Easter. And so I used to run the site bible.net.au. So that's where I had the video about Easter. So yeah, that's they were just like, it's rubbish. You speak like a girl. You got too much estrogen. And just these people who are just anti-King James guys. And so, yeah, even back then, Stephen Avery, wow. I didn't even know who he was back then. I can't even remember him being on this forum. So I'm arguing with Rick Norris. It's like I'm still arguing with Rick Norris on my TR Academy. It's like, oh my God. Anyway, so let's just go from there. But I really want to find the PDF. Okay. I'll just try the Answers in Genesis one. So they ran with my article in Answers in Genesis. So yeah, Nick Sayers argued along these lines to suggest Easter, the etymology of Easter comes from the German. And so that is number 7 there. And it goes to my website. Okay, so let's look at the footnotes. It used to go to Christian Witness Ministries. Now, I do have in my archives, maybe I should actually look for them. CWN. The original Easter article. But I don't want to just bore you guys to tears, just out of my own curiosity. So, yeah, so Mark Ward, he's written on that, Easter, just saying it's not a pagan thing. So in my second article, I say, okay, in part 1, we traced the history of the English Bible. So this was sort of like afterthoughts, just things that just started coming up and other things that I found. There was a guy on Yahoo Chat called Codex 5. Have no idea who he was, but he wrote some brilliant stuff and it triggered off a lot of good thoughts on this. So I sort of summarized the issue there. And then one of the issues was, okay, with a lot of the articles defending the King James, so it was specifically said, like, okay, I think what happened was, say, in Jack Mormon's book, he was saying it was the Passover day, not the Passover week. And it couldn't have been the Passover week sort of thing. There was no such thing as a Passover week. But it was like, no, that's not true. It's a Passover day and a Passover week and a Passover lamb. And there's lots of different definitions for just Passover, you know. You could say, I stayed there for Passover. It could mean the day. It could mean the week. It could mean you ate the meal. You know, so... And so I think what happened in the mind of a lot of people, they thought that because it said then were the days of unleavened bread, and it was still talking about Passover or Pascha. So, well, this is after the Passover feast, but it's still calling it Pascha. So that must mean the Easter celebration of the Christians. So understanding that the Pascha was 1 week, okay. So whether you're a Jew or whether you're a Christian, looking at this was a 1 week period of time, okay. So in that included the beginning on the 14th of the Passover meal that went through, and it included the Feast of First Fruits, and it was called the Days of Unleavened Bread. So I think with the mindset of it's the Passover is specifically talking about the Passover day. And then because it's the days of unleavened bread, some people were pointing and going, well, see, it's talking about the resurrection day, the Sunday after. That's the Pascha, where I do touch on that a tiny bit at the beginning of this article. But then I go on to explain how it's basically in the same festive week. And so you got to understand, like with my first article, it took me quite a long time to sort of think about that and write about it and study about it. And then when I did my second article, I mean, it's not like I'm an academic. I haven't had anyone show me how to do articles or, how to write things properly. And so this second article, I think it was written in 2008, 2008. And so this is 3 years after I wrote my first article. And what I didn't explain properly, which I should have like about this much more written underneath it here, explaining what I just said, that because I'll just read through this in with our current way. Sorry. With our current way of thinking, we sometimes separate Pascha into two distinct time periods, one being Passover and the other Easter. It helps to know that in New Testament times, Jews were celebrating the Passover and Christians were celebrating the resurrection, Easter, at the same period of time. So it's in the same week. Because we have this separation now, where it's like, oh, the Jews have their Passover, 2 weeks ago, or in a month or whatever. We separate those two because of the different calendars. But back in the early church, they didn't do that. They had it all at the same time. But this would fall because people are under different calendars. Some people are under a Roman calendar. Some people are under the Jewish calendar. So the whole church was sort of like, what do we do here? And so this was quite a big topic back then. So one thing I wrote here was it would appear that the rationale of the KJV translators in using the word Easter, not Passover, was that Herod would have thought in terms of the Jewish designation and was waiting until after the festival to bring Peter before the Jews, as his desire was to please the Jews. While Luke, the writer of Acts, made it perfectly clear by stating, "Then were the days of unleavened bread," that he was speaking of the Christians' Pascha, and was making mention that the Passover day had already taken place and the Feast of Unleavened Bread was taking place. Okay. So that there, I would probably leave that out of this article, because looking back, I was a little bit like, I guess, confused with the concept of the Passover one day and the Passover week. But you can see, straight afterwards, I'm talking about a Passover week. So I was going in this direction, but then it's like I corrected myself, but I didn't really correct the article. And I have both sort of in there. So Luke forced the semantic domain of Pascha by making this statement and wasn't referring to the Passover feast day, which was on the first day of the week, but stated that Peter was taken during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was a 7-year period. So I guess in a way I've corrected it, but I've left a tiny little bit hanging over, where my understanding is it's talking about the whole period. The Pascha was the whole, 7-day feast or 8-day feast, or whatever, however long it went for. Including the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But when it says then were the days of unleavened bread, certainly it wasn't the feast day, but that doesn't seem to be of vital importance, because the whole thing is called Pascha. So the whole thing would have been called, if we went retroactively and named it, the whole thing would have been called Easter to the Christians. The Jews would have called it Passover. We would say, oh, that's our Easter. And so it's an interesting thing, and it's something I'm still thinking about. And in Scott Jones's article, Easter or Passover, he has an interesting take on the debate that was happening in the before Christ. So let me just find this. He might have actually added more material to this, but I'll just look for maybe I'll go to a later time. Okay. Might be in the main article. I think I do remember it in the main article. Okay. No. Yeah, here we are. Moreover, Luke was certainly familiar with God's definition of Passover and unleavened bread in Leviticus 23. Accordingly, even a cursory examination of Luke's practice in his treatise demonstrates that Luke did not normally go out of his way to explain Jewish customs. That's not really what I'm looking for. Okay, so here we are. Accordingly, the Pharisees and the Sadducees differed radically on questions of doctrine and ritual, especially on the resurrection, and this battle reared its head in a dispute about the day the wave sheaf would be offered. In other words, the dispute over this matter between the Pharisees and the Sadducees was precisely over whether the wave sheaf should occur on the Sunday after the sacrifice, that is Resurrection Day, or whether it should occur on the festive Paschal Day. This was all perfectly understood by Luke and the other apostles, as Alfred Erdesham observed. Thus, the Sadducees would have interpreted Leviticus 23, 11, 15, 16 as meaning the wave sheaf, or rather the Omer, was to be observed on the morrow after the weekly Sabbath, that is, on the Sunday in the Easter week, which would have brought the Feast of Pentecost always on Sunday. So that was mentioned by, who was it? A guy on my Facebook. Who is often here and might even be watching. But he said, this issue is easily resolved by understanding that the resurrection of Jesus was a fulfillment of the Feast of First Fruits, 1 Corinthians 15, 20-22, which according to Leviticus 23:11 occurs on the morrow after the Sabbath following Passover, i.e. the Sunday following Passover. Thus, the resurrection of Jesus occurred on Sunday. So we're actually talking about which day Jesus died on. So that would be on my recent Facebook page. I just want to find out who that is. Okay. Nick Sayers. Nope, sorry, I'm chasing butterflies here. Sorry about that. I'll keep reading this. So on the Sunday week, which would have brought the Feast of Pentecost always on Sunday, Leviticus 23, 15, 16, while the Pharisees understood the term Sabbath of the festive Paschal Day, connected with this were disputes about the examination of the witnesses who testified to the appearance of the new moon, and whom the Pharisees accused of having suborned by their opponents. So it's got number 4 there. So let's just number 4. So it's Alfred Erdesham, Life and Times of Jesus, book 3, chapter 2, page 222. So interesting. So that's something that, but when I was writing this second article, was something that sort of went over my head a little bit, and I thought, well, I don't really want to go into that. I just sort of want to talk about the festive week. So that's why I just sort of said, look, even the liberal Bible translator and scholar Philip Schaff said Easter is the resurrection festival which follows the Passover proper, but is included in the same festive week. So to me, it just made sense. It's the same week. Helg says, Ananias, and take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in that evil day. Wow. Thursday. Yeah, so that was the main thing I was trying to bring out. It's the same week, because to me that was a revelation too. It's like, okay, we got past the pagan thing, and then it's like, okay, well, what are they? Let's look at the whole thing of Acts, because I've sort of made my point that Easter is a word that means resurrection. It's fine to have it in the King James, but then it's like, okay, what about the timing of that? And so understanding that it's in the same festive week, that Luke didn't use a separate Greek word. He just used Pascha. Okay. And here's another little, I guess they're weasel words. I'm trying to bring it a debate. The Textus Receptus itself, instead of saying the Greek text itself, the Textus Receptus, so that people are like, oh, he's a TR guy. And so, yeah, going through a lot of this, Lamp says Pascha came to mean Easter in the early church. Lamp lists several rules and observances by Christians in the celebration of their Pascha or Easter. He also points to various words such as Paschazo, Pasculia to mean celebrate Easter and Eastertide. Gerhard Kittel, the good Nazi, he said Pascha came to be called Easter in the celebration of the resurrection within the primitive church. So that's my main issue, is like, and I think this is what TurretinFan really wants to bring on, is a debate that Easter was something that was formulated in the early church fathers, around or by 120, everyone was celebrating. But so he sort of wants to bring out that, between the death of John, which a lot of people say happened at the end of the first century, and 120, it sort of appeared and everyone celebrated it. I'm like, because he's saying the apostles definitely didn't celebrate this. It must be remembered that the Pascha was the most important feast of the Jews. The early church, including Luke, would have initiated the trend of not celebrating the old shadow Pascha, but celebrating the new Pascha. Now, this would have taken time. It wouldn't have just been like the next year after Jesus resurrected from the dead, the next year the Pascha appeared, the Passover. The Christians would have been like, well, what are we going to do? And so they probably would have celebrated with everyone else and done the same things, but it's like they're seeing all these symbols and they're like, wow, this is Christ. Christ is our Passover. And then eventually, because they were still in Jewish circles, okay, but eventually it became a Gentile thing. And so, Paul's gone and preached to the Gentiles, and they're like, well, everyone's still doing this Passover celebration. In Israel, they still would have been doing all the feasts, but they would have meant something so much different to the Christians. And so perhaps the practice mightn't have, they might, because I guess in a way I've often said, not often, but every now and then I've just said, like, the next year they didn't kill a lamb, they just had Easter, that sort of thing. But it's like it probably would have been a bit of a time of transition, just as much as they didn't realize that they got to go to the Gentiles and preach to them. And they knew they had to preach to them, but I guess for them to understand that they could have the same salvation and be one, the middle wall of divisions broken down. It took Peter to, have that understanding with the Cornelius issue, and Paul to go and preach the gospel and all that. And so it took a while for all that to occur. And then that would have broken down a lot of those things. And then so imagine, the early Christians in Ephesus, they're like, we want to do the Pascha. It's the Christian Pascha. So that's why Luke made that very clear distinction. But in a sense where, I should really say that's why the King James makes that distinction between Easter and the Passover, because one is the New Testament one is the Old Testament one. And so, so anyway, let's just continue. So Alfred Erdeshim says It was to be the last of the old Paschas, so talking about the Last Supper, and the first, or rather symbol of promise, of the new. And so the new Pascha is what we call Easter. He clearly knew that every Pascha from the time of the cross was to be the new Pascha and not the old. And so the thing is, the Old Testament celebrations and all that, they're all redundant after Christ rose from the dead. That they don't really, the knows and types and things like that. And especially a lot of it has to do with, I mean, if like people say, well, I don't celebrate Easter, I celebrate Passover. It's like, okay, so you kill a lamb. Oh, no. Like some people actually do. They get a lamb, they kill it, they do everything according to the law. But most people are like, no, I went to a Jewish guy's house and we wore little skull caps and we had a bone of a lamb there and we had some, we all said shalom. And it's like, well, is that the biblical Passover? That's like when people say, oh, I kept the Sabbath. I'm like, oh, okay. So you don't light any fires on the Sabbath? Like you don't drive your car on the Sabbath? Oh, well, no, I do drive my car. It's like, well, the Bible says if you light a fire on the Sabbath, you should really be stoned to death. I mean, I can get some rocks now if you want. But what about the punishments of the Sabbath? Are they still valid or just you keeping the Sabbath? So this is the whole thing about, I keep the Passover and we should just be having, instead of Happy Easter, let's have Happy Passover and do a Passover celebration. And they do it according to modern Jews. It's like, how is that being biblical? If you want to be under the law, if you want to do all this stuff the Old Testament way, you got to do it to the full extent of the law, and you got to bring in the old law punishments. I mean, how come you only want the good things? It's a bit like recently the whole discussion of what a woman is, and women's sports, and people saying, oh, we want equal pay, with in some arenas, in some sports, it's like, yeah, cool. You deserve equal pay because you're getting the same results of people coming and subscribing and watching and tuning in and following through with money. But some of these women's sports, they aren't coming up to the same level as men's sports, and so you can't demand equal pay, or else that's inequality. You can't, the men in that sport are probably only getting 1% of all the earnings. You know what I mean? Where in the women's sport, they would be getting like 40% of the earnings because the earnings aren't that big in some of these women's sports. And so I think you see the parallel that I was bringing with that. But let's just continue here, or else I'll just rabbit trail. Philip Schaff. John Owen said there was also a signal vindication of the truth pleaded for in an instance of fact among the primitive churches. There was an opinion which prevailed very early among them about the necessary observation of Easter in the room, in the place of the Jewish Passover, for the solemn commemoration of the death and resurrection of our Savior. So for the solemn commemoration of the death and resurrection of our Savior. It was taken for granted by most of them that the observance hereof was countenanced, if not rendered necessary to them, by the examples of the apostles. So this is John Owen saying that the observance was countenanced. So Easter overtook Passover. It was not rendered necessary to them by the example of the apostles, for they generally believed that it was by them, the apostles, it was observed, and that it was their duty to accommodate themselves to their practice. So most people felt that the apostles celebrated Easter. Okay. Ishati says Katapaska. By the later 2nd century, it was accepted that the celebration of Easter was a practice of the disciples and an undisputed tradition. That Easter was to be observed by virtue of apostolical tradition was generally granted by all. So when you got TurretinFan sort of saying that Easter it's not a New Testament concept, it's not something the apostles did. Well, John Owen is definitely disagreeing with that, and to me, it's just obvious. I don't know why he's arguing against that, and I guess because I brought forth the argument without all this reference, and now he's going back through the reference, and maybe he's like, "Oh, I've spoken too much," because there was so much written about Easter in the early church that you can't get around. I'm just stating the obvious, really. So Philip Schaff observed, from some hints in the epistles, viewed in the light of universal and uncontradicted practice of the church in the 2nd century, it may be inferred that the annual celebration of the death and the resurrection of Christ and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit originated in the apostolic age. In truth, Christ, crucified, risen, and living in the church was the one absorbing thought of the early Christians. And as this thought expressed itself in the weekly observance of Sunday, so it would also very naturally transform the two great typical feasts of the Old Testament into the Christian Easter and Whitsunday. The Paschal controversies of the 2nd century related not to the fact, but to the time of the Easter festival. And Polycarp of Smyrna and Hackett of Rome traced their customs to a difference in the practice of the apostles themselves. And so I've got John Owen, Philip Schaff. Philip Schaff was contemporary with Westcott and Hort. He's a church historian. So this is why I've put him there. It's like, well, Philip Schaff says this. Okay. Then I go through the Quartodecimans. So some people on the 14th of Nisan, they would, that's when they would celebrate. Some people on the 17th of Nisan, or what would be a representation of the 17th of Nisan, which was the day after the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, okay, which would mean the Sunday. So if you had, say a random day, so like a Monday or Tuesday, the Passover occurred. So the following Sunday would be the wave sheath thing that they had in the Old Testament. So that was a representative of the Feast of First Fruits. So that became representative of the Sunday after the 14th was the Resurrection Day. So that's where people, eventually at the Council of Nicaea, that's where it became solidified that that's what they're going to do. So around 120 AD, Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, went to see the Christian leader Anicetus, to discuss the proper date of this celebration. Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, visited Rome to confer with him about the controversy of the date of Easter. Those in Asia celebrated it on the movable weekday of the 14th of Nisan, the Jewish Passover, while those in Rome did it on the first Sunday after the Passover. They decided to let each group continue as they'd been doing rather than cause a split. Okay, so you got Polycarp of Smyrna. He's going to Rome, okay. In 120, they're talking about saying, okay, well, you guys are celebrating your Pascha on the 14th of Nisan, the day of the Passover day. We're celebrating it on the Sunday after. Look, that's fine. You do it on that day. We do it on that day. Just be convinced, in your own mind, and let's not cause a split. And so, doesn't that show that they were all doing it by 120? You know what I mean? It's not like he went up to Rome and there was 15 of them doing it, and most of them didn't practice it. No, they're all doing it by 120. I mean, how much earlier do I have to go? If it was 115 or 110 or 100, would TurretinFan go, oh, okay, well, it's probably something by the apostles, 120, and everyone's doing it, And of course, when I say everyone, it's like, you'll find the odd person who's not doing something, but it's like the vast majority of people are doing this. So Helge says, Bilomenos meto topaska anagagin ofto to leo, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Very nice. So you've got the Pascha, yeah. Okay, so Eusebius, let's read some more. A question of no small importance rose at that time, about 190, okay. The diocese of all Asia, as from an older tradition, held that the 14th day of the moon, on which day the Jews were commanded to sacrifice a lamb, should always be observed as the feast of the life-giving Pasch, contending that the fast ought to end on that day, whatever day of the week it might happen to be. However, it was not the custom of the churches in the rest of the world to end it at that point, as they observe the practice which from apostolic tradition, notice again, from apostolic tradition, has prevailed to the present time, of terminating the fast on no other day than that of the resurrection of our Saviour. So some people were doing it on the Sunday after. These words of the father of church history tell us that almost all we know concerning the Paschal controversy in its first stage. A letter to Irenaeus is among the extracts just referred to, and this shows that the diversity of practice regarding Easter had existed at least from the time of 120 AD. Further, Irenaeus states that Polycarp, who, like the other Asiatics, kept Easter on the 14th day of the moon, whatever day of the week it might be, following therein the tradition which he claimed to have derived from St. John the Apostle, came to Rome in circa 150 AD about this very question. Paul had prophetically given good advice to the Roman church on these matters. One day esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regards the day regards it to the Lord, and he that does not regard the day to the Lord, he does not regard it. But why do you judge your brother, or why do you show contempt for your brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Great verse there. So interestingly, Paul scolded the Galatian church for lapsing into ritualism, saying, but now, after you have known God, or rather known by God, how is it that you turn again to the weak and beggarly elements to which you again desire to be in bondage? You observe days, months, seasons, and years. I am afraid for you, lest I have labored for you in vain. Galatians chapter 4, verses 9 to 11. So then I talk about the Quartodecimans, who were sort of seen as legalists. I talk a little bit about the change of the calendar. And that's where I have, Jesus died on the Thursday thing. A little snippet of information to stir up a few people. And then I go through Henry Saville. So Henry Saville and going through his role as a translator. So Henry Saville, I might just read through this actually. King James Bible translator Henry Saville was briefly mentioned in our last article. He was an expert on the Greek language, mathematics, and church history, and had been personal tutor in Greek and mathematics to Queen Elizabeth. He also founded the first chairs of geometry and astronomy in Oxford. His greatest work, besides his work on the King James Bible, was translating the complete works of the most famous Greek church father, John Chrysostom, from Greek into English. During his compilation of 15,800 manuscript sheets, he scoured all the libraries of Europe, buying the oldest and purest of the Chrysostom manuscripts. Saville's edition of Chrysostom has been called the one great work of Renaissance scholarship carried out in England, and was the most considerable work of pure learning undertaken in England at the time. Saville, who frequented Europe, was considered by some to be the greatest scholar of his age. Adam Nicholson, who wrote a book about the translators, dispelled the myth that the King James Bible emerged from an isolated and insular England by saying a river of European influences runs through it, the version, and through no more open conduit than Henry Saville. Saville translated Acts chapter 12, verse 4 as a member of the Oxford Translation Committee assigned to translate Acts, the Gospels, and Revelation. Saville was often called in by King James to translate the church books into Latin, Italian, and French. Chrysostom, so he did this massive work of Chrysostom. Chrysostom, whose works Saville translated from Greek into English, was staunchly opposed to Quartodecimanism, which occurred mainly in Asia. While Irenaeus claimed to have roots in apostolic tradition via John, the majority of the church practiced Easter on the Sunday after the Passover feast. In his 1612 edition of Homilies, 27, volume 6, which is Discourse 1 in Patrologia Graeca Adversus Judaeos, Saville gives the title Chrysostom's Discourse Against Those Who Were Judaizing and Observing Their Fasts, revealing Saville's depth of knowledge of the Easter controversies. Interestingly, the earliest book with mathematical content to be printed at Oxford was Compotus Manualis ad Usum Oxonianissum. I've just butchered that. Printed by Charles Kieforth in 1520. This book explained how to make calculations for Easter. The second mathematical book to be published in Oxford was Sir Henry Saville's Lectures on Euclid's Elements in 1621. So if one were to search the biographies of Christian history, I'm just going to put this banner up, because if anyone wants to join in, come on board, come live, we'll chat. Can ask me anything to do with Easter. If one were to search the biographies of Christian history to select a person equipped to translate Acts chapter 12, verse 4 into English from Greek, it would be hard to discover anyone more able than Saville. Obsessed with Chrysostom, an enemy of Quartodecimanism, Saville was intimately acquainted with the Easter controversies. He was a noted mathematician with a mind for detail and chronological events, and one of the greatest English Greek scholars who personally tutored the Queen of England. I doubt you'd find anyone more appropriate than Saville. And so I still believe that stance. I think he was a brilliant guy. He knew a lot. He knew the original languages very well. He knew Chrysostom's work very well, and Chrysostom dealt with each Easter controversy. So it was like, who else could you get to better translate the word Pascha in Acts chapter 12? And so then I'll go through the way that the Bible was translated, the King James. So I might just quickly go through this, because this usually comes up a lot in any King James debate, and oftentimes I'm going through this because people don't realize how many times the Bible was checked over. And this is why we believe the King James to be a superior translation, because of the way the scholars used their cross-referencing system, cross-checking system, I should really say. And so listen to this. Bancroft, one of the translators, penned the rules to be observed in translation. He lists some very interesting procedures that demolish myths about private interpretation or a translator's oversight in regard to Easter. Rule 8 states, every particular man of each company to take you some chapter or chapters, and having translated or amended them severally by himself where he thinks good, to all meet together, confer what they have done, and to agree for their parts what shall stand. So if you just say there was 6 companies and 10 in each company, just so we can do the math, okay? So out of these 10 guys, they're all to take their section that they're translating, and they're to work on it themselves. So that to make all 10 of them are to make their own edition. and then they all meet together and blend those 10 into one principal edition. Okay. So thus the translators of Acts, for example, all personally translated the book by themselves, and then their particular group corporately amalgamated those personal translations into one copy, which was wholeheartedly agreed to by the entire group. Rule 9 requires that as one company hath dispatched any one book in this manner, they shall send it to the rest to be considered of seriously and judiciously, for His Majesty is very careful on this point. So they've done 10 translations, right? They amalgamate it into one. Then they send that one off to the other 50 translators. So it gets looked over 50 times. Okay. And these works are discussed and thought about, and they read through it, and they all comment on it. Okay. So once the group had reached a consensus, then they then sent the manuscript of Acts off to the rest of the translators to be examined by each group. Rule 10 records, if any company upon review of you books so sent really doubt or differ upon any place, to send them word thereof. So notice there's a doubt, or a difference. So there could be like, okay, well, someone might have said, well, we don't think Easter is appropriate there, or whatever, Or it might be, okay, we've got a difference here. So there might be, say, the way that they use the word, some word in the Old Testament. It might be like, look, we're actually using it in this type of way. Can you amalgamate your New Testament section to match in with what we're saying, or else it's just going to have two clashing type of words here. We want it to flow from Genesis to Revelation in the same way with this particular word. So if someone had doubts, or if they differ upon any place, to send them word thereof, note the place, and withal send their reasons, to which if they consent not, the difference to be compounded at the general meeting, which is to be the chief persons of each company at the end of the work. And so if they couldn't sort of figure out, how to settle this, these were all written down, and there was going to be a meeting, a general meeting, which they all talked about these, and they brought this sort of stuff up. In addition, there was a chance to respond to reviewers in front of a committee. When in any place of special obscurity is doubted of, letters to be directed by authority to send to any learned man in the land for his judgment of any place. So if further agreements could not be reached, further authorities in the land were to be consulted on particular matters. This reveals the great lengths they went to for the translation's accuracy. So they'll get outsiders in to talk about Easter as well. But I don't think they needed to do that. I think there was just a general consensus that they believed that Easter was a word that meant the resurrection, and Passover was a word that was to do with the Jewish Pesach, and to them that had just become a normal sort of thing. Okay, so we've got Dan Strait has just joined us, and he says, I think the idea of celebrating Easter and Christmas is pagan. I'm not sure why Christmas is brought up there, but is pagan. And I think the idea of celebrating Easter and Christmas is pagan, is ridiculous. Unless you literally are worshipping other gods on purpose. It's just dumb. Okay. Easter is a celebration commemorating our Lord and Savior rising from the dead. Okay, so we've got someone joining us here. It's Dan Strait. How you going? Can you hear me there, Dan? I might put my headphones on. One, two. Can you hear me there, Dan? I can hear you tapping away. So it's not me. I wonder who that is. Oh, the comment's in the way. Hang on. Okay. Can you see yourself there now, Dan? Cool. Well, I'll just keep reading through, and if you want to just join in at any time, just go for it. So it says here, Easter is the celebration commemorating our Lord and Savior rising from the dead, a day Christians should observe. Okay, so it seems to contradict what was just said. I think the idea of celebrating Easter and Christmas is pagan. Aha! Sorry. Saying it's pagan is ridiculous. I thought you were talking about saying they're both pagan and they're both ridiculous. Yeah, now I understand. Okay. And we've got shalom, everyone. And so I'm not actually sure who's joined. So Dan says it's not me. It just says Dan straight there, where I thought it was a little bubble that came up on the screen there. So anyway, someone's joined, and I'll just keep going through this. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I was a bit confused about that, because usually Dan is on side with me with a lot of these issues, and I was like, wow, that's different. But I think it was just the way you worded it. So it was sort of saying, that Easter and Christmas is a pagan festival, that people think it's a pagan thing is wrong, sort of thing. And so that's what we're all saying. So that sort of clears it up. So okay, so this is one of the things that so we've gone through the rules of the King James translators, and then I just tidy up a few things. Now, one of the things that I brought out in my my article here, and it's also got to be remembered that these articles I made videos on, and so the videos became quite a lot more popular than the articles, because I found that people really didn't want to watch long-winded or read long-winded articles. They wanted to watch something that was nice and pretty and had some good pictures and things like that. So in my first video, I read through the first and second article, and I explain it sort of like I'm explaining it to children. Okay. And so going through these things here. I'm not sure who it was who just joined us. I added them, but they didn't want to chat, so that's fine. And I just thought it was Dan Straight because it was coming up. I'll just show you where it was coming up. It was coming up. There was a head here and a head there, and it just said Dan Straight. I was like, oh, Dan Straight's just joined us. And it wasn't Dan Straight, so I don't know who it was. But anyway, never mind. But if anyone does want to join us, just jump on board. Don't be shy. Sorry about that, Dan. I misrepresented you, and I said that you're in my chat. So it wasn't a good start to you joining our little conversation here, but I do truly apologize about that. So I go on about Hislop, put a cross through his thing, and then talking about the skill of the translators and what language they used, and actually that was a bit of a typo where I said that the cognate languages included, I think I included Persian there, which is not a Semitic language. Easter, all of these people, Easter, Uster, Easter, they all use Easter, but of course, it's a pagan thing. So all these people thought it was a pagan thing, so it's just ridiculous. Actually, that there, that's my old video. Anyway, I'll get rid of that. So yeah, if you do want to know exactly what I'm saying in these two articles, just go through the first video. It goes for an hour. And maybe what I should do at the end of this, I might actually just run this video through. I might just run through both of the videos, and I'll just put it up on the big screen, and then anyone can comment or whatever. And I'll just go off and do my thing and come back. But you can just go to these and watch it. Okay. So yeah, talking about Pascha, Gerhard Kittel, what he thought. Explain all the dates. Going through Henry Saville in Oxford, and his work, the complete works of Chrysostom, the rules of the translators, and then I go through these things, which I think is a death blow to a lot of people who say it should be just read Passover. They were using the word Easter for the celebration of the resurrection. How do we find Easter? Here it has Easter Day. It's sideways, but then it's like, okay, you can find it for these years. Okay, all going all the way down, and it's talking about the Easter Day. It's not talking about Passover Day. It doesn't mention the Passover. They're not celebrating Passover, and so the whole issue of Easter meaning Easter and being the day that they celebrate the resurrection is very clear. And so the usage around that time, the usage was getting to the point where it's like today, where we have Passover as a separate celebration for Jewish people and Easter for the Christians. And this is where I come against Bryan Ross's concept of, and that's exactly what I mentioned in this article here. So I'll get down to this. So I'm talking about Easter. Where are we? Yeah. Being in the preface of the King James, it's specifically talking about Easter. And then I'm saying, thus, when Easter was referred to in any of the 1611 KJV prefaces or tables, it was referring to what we know today as Easter. It never refers to Easter as Passover, and when Passover is referred to, it is the Jewish holiday. From the above, one must conclude that Easter was inserted by the KJV translators. When it was inserted, it was done so by design, showing their trend of using Easter as a post-resurrection Pascha and Passover as a pre-resurrection Pascha, also causing the definition of Easter as the Jewish Passover to become obsolete, as the Oxford Dictionary would later define Easter in the multi-volume Oxford English Dictionary, also showing the second meaning, number 2, the Jewish Passover, obsolete. So that there, Mark Ward is sort of like, oh, these guys don't know how to use a dictionary. He's teaching people how to use the Oxford English Dictionary. Well, here's an article in 2008 where I'm using it. And like I pointed out in one of my other videos, I just randomly, I was like, oh, actually, I think the D.A. Waite mentions the Oxford English Dictionary. And I grabbed his 1992 book, where at the back it has question and answers, and it said, where do we go to define a lot of these words? And he hadn't done the Define King James Bible at the time. And he said, go to the Oxford English Dictionary. It's the best one you can get. And so, he's Mark Ward like, oh, look, I've just come up with this fresh revelation sort of thing, use the Oxford English Dictionary. And it's like, yeah, okay, Mark. And, and they're all coming full circle and saying it's not a pagan festival. It's like, Okay. Which King James onlyists were the ones screaming this from the rooftops. So, and Passover as a pre-resurrection Pascha, also causing the definition of Easter, the Jewish Passover, to become obsolete. So this comes against the concept that Bryan Ross is saying. Okay. So the difference between what Bryan Ross is saying and what I'm saying is this. I'm saying that Easter means resurrection. Okay. By the time 1611 came around, the usage of that word had changed so much that they went, okay, in the Bible, how about we just use Passover as an Old Testament word for the Old Covenant, and we use Easter once as a New Testament word in the New Covenant. So that's what they did. They put it there. Before that, Easter was used in many different places where Pascha appeared. So that's why they have the Jewish Passover obsolete. So you would, if you went up to someone and said, "How was your Easter?" to a Jewish person, they'd say, "Oh, I don't celebrate Easter. I celebrate the Passover." Because the Passover, that's what it means today. Where did that start? Well, it started around this era, and I believe that one of the main fulcrums behind pointing the word to its correct etymology was this verse in Acts chapter 12, verse 4, where it has Easter as a new covenant concept and Passover as an old covenant concept in the other verses. So to me, it just makes perfect sense. The usage matches up. Oftentimes it just comes down to usage, because people are like, how can you like, say, Turretin, why translate Pascha as Easter there in Acts chapter 12, verse 4? It doesn't make any sense. Just wind the clock forward to the Easter controversies, and they're using the same word Pascha for Easter all the way through. It's a no-brainer. It's very clear. And so, anyway, most of the time it's just people don't understand the usage. And to me, it's like, how do you sort of explain that? It's like, okay, so they use Pascha in Acts chapter 12, verse 4, and the King James guys have Easter there. And now if you fast forwarded the clock to, say, 150, when they're talking about Easter things there, it's the word Pascha in the Greek that they're talking about. And it's translated as Easter. So this is exactly the same. If you fast forward another 100 years, it's the same. Fast forward another 200 years, it's the same. I mean, get to 1611 and it's like Pascha. It's like, well, it can mean, now we have two words because Tyndale invented a word, Passover, which probably comes from Luther's Passover. So it's become obsolete. So what Bryan Ross is saying is that the King James translators, they just like just as random as the Bishop's Bible has Easter twice. For some reason, the Bishop's Bible has Easter twice. That was just sort of like a random thing. They had Passover here and Passover. Now, what had happened with Tyndale? Tyndale started to use Easter as a New Testament word and Passover as an Old Testament word. That's what he started to do. Now, it went through a whole bunch of other Bibles, the Great Bible, Geneva Bible, So it's gone and sort of, sometimes it's got Easter, sometimes it's got Passover. But then it gets down to the King James translators. What are they going to do? 60 of the greatest scholars of Europe, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to use Easter as a New Testament concept, and they're going to stop this whole concept of it being related to the Jewish Passover. This sort of inadvertently just happened by them doing this, because that's what we have today. We have this separation. And so thus agreeing with Seville, who was an Oxford man himself, so the Oxford English Dictionary, they have the roots in Seville. The above also backs up our previous article about Easter, that the King James translation ended an 86-year trend which began at Tyndale. So Tyndale started the whole concept. He had Easter, and he used that everywhere for Pascha, whether it was Passover or Easter, from a modern sense. And then when he was translating the Old Testament, he went to he invented Passover, and so but he died before he could really finish the Old Testament, and so and iron out all those issues, and so it sort of went through. It covered our Bible. It went through all those editions right up until the Bishop's Bible, when they had it in Acts chapter 12 verse 4, but they also had it in John chapter 11, I think. I'm pretty sure. So out of the 29 times, they had it twice. With the King James translators, they went, no, let's just have it once in the New Testament concept, because you got to understand the Old Testament was still in force up until Christ resurrected. So when you're reading through, John chapter 8, it's still in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, I should specifically say. And so a lot of people don't think about that. They just, it's a New Testament. It's like, well, no, they're initiating. Christ was always pointing forward to that time. In the kingdom, it's going to be like this. In the kingdom, it's going to be like that. And so that's, Christ was pointing for, and oftentimes he'd say a whole bunch of stuff to his disciples and then look at them in their eyes, and they're all like, look, I'm going to have to send the Holy Spirit. He'll remind you of everything, because I know you've forgotten half of what I've said here, and you're not getting it because you're not spiritually alive yet, in a sense of the new covenant. And they just didn't get a lot of things. Jesus is like, I'm going to die, rise from the dead, 3 days in the whale's belly, like Jonah. He's spelling it out for them. And they're just sort of like, and then after the resurrection, the Holy Spirit's poured out upon them. They're like, I'm getting it, And so, it has to be a supernatural thing, because in the natural they were struggling. So, so then I conclude with that. So and I sort of threw out these things as well. It will be much more edifying to learn of subjects such as the Passover lamb fulfilled in Christ, or the fulfillment of the 69 weeks of Daniel on the 10th of Nisan. So that's pretty specific. These are like, I want to talk about these. The Lord's Supper, the blood, the resurrection, because there was the whole debate on whether healing was in the blood, physical healing was in the blood atonement, or whether physical healing was in the name of Jesus Christ. And so that was a whole debate that I was very had my finger on the pulse with. The resurrection, etc., which no doubt many have been doing, however, should do with even more boldness, proclaiming them without unnecessary doubting or confusion, etc. So do this in remembrance of me. Paul stated that therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. And so I have a better referencing system here. And I actually wrote, while I believe this view, which is also the view of Dave Hunt, some claim Wednesday to be the day, including Chuck Missler. Philip Powell of Christian Witness Ministries also argues for a Wednesday crucifixion. So he was the guy who was printing these articles and urging me to start writing. Aussie Gold says, Happy Easter, y'all. God bless. Happy Easter. Happy resurrection. The resurrection. So then we go to our third article. So this is my final one. And probably the least, it didn't conclude well. I actually sent this to the guy who printed my first two articles in his magazine, and he didn't like it. He was like, because in the first one, it's like, I've nailed this pagan goddess, Ishtar, okay? Then in the second one, I'm like, this is why they put it in the King James translation. Bang. Nailed that. Then in the third one, I'm like, I think I wrote this in about 2011 or something. I'd come to realize that there were two pagan goddesses. See, the confusion with Hislop is like you're sort of amalgamating Ishtar with Yostar, and it's like, he's talking about the same thing. But he's not. So there was a pagan goddess, Ishtar, okay? Has nothing to do with what we're talking about at all with this whole conversation. So if anyone brings up Ishtar, shut them down. Just ridiculous. But there is a supposed goddess called Eosta, which is spelt similar to Easter. It's but it's pronounced like Eosta. So then it was like, okay, well, I've got to do an article explaining this and explaining how it's not related to that one either. And I think what happened was the guy who was going to print this article, he just sort of went, I thought you'd already come against this pagan goddess thing, but not realizing that, well, there was two of these pagan goddesses. And with the similar sort of sounding name as well. And it was confusing for him. But for me, I was just like, oh, this information is sort of new to me. I've got to deal with it. And so I wrote, after writing 2 articles concerning Easter and why it is a Christian celebration in its entirety, after some criticism, it dawned on me that most people will not read long-winded articles. And even after a few minutes of sharing my articles with people on the internet, instead of them taking time to read and examine them, they would speedily respond by copying and pasting something about a pagan goddess from some obscure website. So after some time, I created a video on the topic, which is basically a 1-hour articles with several pictures to keep people's interest. Although the video was a bit rushed, it gives a good visual account of why I believe Easter should remain in Acts chapter 12, verse 4, and also remain part of the annual church service. Because people were cancelling Easter, saying it's all pagan. I mean, it's so ridiculous because it's only this whole issue, if it was real, is only an English-speaking issue and perhaps German. But what about people in Russia? They're using the word Pasch. You know, they don't have this pagan link, and so even some King James only people were saying that Easter was a stolen pagan thing, and yeah, it was a strange time. Just 20 years ago, it was a strange time. And talking with anyone about Easter, I was asking people left, right, and center about Easter. I mean, I was talking to world experts. I mean, David Crystal, world-leading expert on the English language. I sent him my first Easter article, and he went through it, and he corrected a few things because I had this concept that it was related to Easter without the A in it, Esther, and how that was closer to the German Oster. And he said, no, that's not correct. It's just a spelling variation. It looks like there's a connection. And so actually I mentioned that here. So I'm sort of preempting. Supporters and critics. When I wrote my first Easter article, world-leading expert on the English language, David Crystal, gave me some pointers about Easter and its German connection and mentioned that the article was accurate and good. Although slightly disagreeable on certain minor points, Christianity Today has since published an article on Easter being Christian. And also Jonathan Safadi of Creation Ministries International has used the information to confirm my stance on Easter. When I approached James White, actually, I don't mention answers in Genesis there. That's weird because that's like one of the main guys is answers in Genesis. Actually, let's have a look at this article. Creation Ministries International. Maybe I should just type in Easter there. Why Easter? Easter is pagan. Meaning of Easter. Okay. Okay, so they have a full video on that now. Okay. There's Jonathan Safadi. He sort of ran with some of my Easter material. So yeah, this was published in 2008. Okay, so this was referencing my first article. So yeah, you can see here where he's basically just copied basically just copied my article straight out, which is fine because I was copying from another book. So you can see here Anglo-Saxon roots, and so I've got a whole bunch of days, about Easter, and so whoops, where are we? And so yeah, he's got the same thing basically. The German origin, and so he's saying, Passover, Ostern, Osterlam, Juden, Ostern, etc. But that's probably using the modern Luther. I think it was Oster, not Ostern. Ostern's a more modern spelling. And he goes through William Tyndale Easter and the New English Bible, and his New English Bible, words that he invented. Tyndale's use of Esther here, Tyndale and Passover. Does it come from a Saxon goddess? And he's got bead, bunnies. Was Jesus crucified on Good Friday? Okay, 3 days, 3 nights. So it goes into these other questions. Okay, so the following articles was very informative. Nick says why we should not pass over Easter. So contending earnestly for the faith, volume 43. So I wonder if I can put that in a search. Find that. It's a shame because I used to run their website, and I put a lot of work into that, and now it's just gone. The guys who took over the church, I don't know if they actually agree with what Philip Powell was doing. Philip Powell was every bit of information that he had to push truth for the church. He was, sacrificially giving, and so was I. So was everyone. And now it's just gone. It's like CWM, or Christian Witness Ministries. It's a terrible way to write it. So they've still got the main site. So I remember buying that, christianwitnessministries.com.au for them. Our magazine. Yeah, they do. They do have it here. That's great. This is a mag. Now let's check out the Easter one. So that would have been, is Easter pagan? Easter pagan or Christian? By Philip Powell. No. You can't look at it online. Passover, Easter. Okay. Yeah, because I remember typing all this in. So it's got my article there, but it's not exactly like it was in the magazine, which had pictures and stuff like that, which you can't seem to look at. But anyway, that was March the 1st, 2008. And then he put my second one in, I think it was the next year. No, 2009. Maybe it was 2009. Process, not Passover, Easter Part 2 by Nick says. Yep, so there we go. So interesting. And one thing that I didn't like was the summary and conclusion. Now, Philip said to me, now Philip's passed away now, so, all respect to him. And, it was so good for him to put these in his magazine, which was very popular at the time. He had 8,000 subscribers to that in Australia. So the early church never debated about this, They only debated on which day to celebrate it on. Now, he said, whether they are right or wrong, you be the judge, which to me is sort of like, at the time I didn't want to put that in the article, but he sort of made me. He put it there, and I was like, because I was right. I knew I was right. I was like, well, whether they were right or wrong, you be the judge. It's like, well. But anyway. So yeah, they were the two articles, and the third one he didn't put in. So anyway, Jonathan Sephardi, but I'm just surprised that I didn't have this article, which does mention me, Nick Sayers, and this was first written in 2011. So I must have written this before 2011, this third article. So anyway, I'll just sort of skim through it. And when I approached James White from Alpha and Omega Ministries, who wrote the book King James Only Controversy, he speedily rebuked me and called me a Ruckmanite for making such claims and banned me from his forum. On the flip side, D.A. Waite, who wrote Defending the King James Bible, printed parts of the articles in his newsletter. After having formally taught that Easter was pagan, his contemporary Jack Mormon also read the articles and said the information had taken the matter forward considerably from his former article on the topic. Okay. Okay, so someone said the stream got a bit blurry for a second. Yeah, so sorry about that. Okay, so first off, I go through 2,000 years of Greek. If you simply go to Google Translate, let's do this. If we go, translate from Greek into English. Okay. Let's go to Greek. Into English. It should be English into Greek. I don't know why it's got that at the beginning of it. Just stop it. Okay, so let's go Pascha. So basically, Passover is Pascha and Easter is Pascha. Modern Greek. Okay, I don't know why it's got Hebraica there. So Pascha into English means Easter. Look at that. And so, because the saying it's Passover is obsolete, isn't that amazing? So that's the modern English. Modern Greek. So if you type in the words Pascha and Easter, the answer in Greek for both is Pascha. One Pascha, the Passover, is the Old Testament type, and the other Pascha, Easter, is the New Testament fulfillment. This has been the same in Greek for 2,000 years, only the context formulated the difference. This is evident in the early church writings, who often use Pascha for both the Old Testament and New Testament feasts. So that there is something that it just seems to not enter into people's minds. It's like, well, people are like, where's an example of where they use this as a Pascha, as a celebration for the resurrection? It's like all the early church writers. I mean, some of the earliest writings that we have are about Easter, and it's Pascha. It's like... So I mention it there, but it's like, that should just be common knowledge, especially for people who are coming against me and claiming that, they've got the good oil and what it really should be. Tyndale invented the word Passover, and thus we Englishmen no longer had one word for the Old Testament feast and the New Testament feast, but two. Previously, we only used Easter, sometimes Pascha, but rarely. In Scripture, Passover was practiced before the resurrection occurred. So historically, before the resurrection occurred, it was Passover, okay? And Easter, meaning resurrection, was practiced by the church after the resurrection occurred. Acts chapter 12, verse 4 occurred after the cross, being the only scripture befitting the post-resurrection context of Easter and not Passover. So the only historical word where Pascha is in the New Testament historical setting is in Acts 12, verse 4. That's why it's Easter. Bead and pagan roots. So then we go through the whole issue of bead again. But, going through the whole roots of, I'm babbling. I need some water. It's been 2 hours and 30 minutes and I've just been babbling on. Now, if anyone wants to join me, just type this in and jump on board and have a chat. Okay, so bead and pagan roots. So this was the reason why the guy didn't want to put it in the magazine. He's like, I thought you dealt with this pagan issue. It's like, well, we dealt with the first pagan issue, but because Hislop combined all the pagan goddesses into one big devil, there was this other one called Josta, which is like a Germanic type of one, okay, which is the main one that Bede was talking about, okay. So before I sort of said I didn't know about it, I did know about it, but it was like I hadn't really formulated an argument against that in writing, and I hadn't really formulated. I sort of felt like the whole pagan thing was really mostly about Ishtar, which was ridiculous in itself, and going into the finer details was just like, why bother? But then people kept bringing this up and saying, no, it's related to the Germanic goddess. Bede talked about it, and I was like, okay, so that's what I'm dealing with. So the first, so over the years, I've been asked repeated questions by people who have tried to cling to the pagan goddess myth. It was qualified in the previous two articles that Easter was considered by the reformers to be the celebration of the resurrection and never once referring to a pagan goddess. But what about the English historian Bede and the goddess Josta claims? So obviously I'm saying this is like, what about these claims? You know, not the Ishtar claims. So that was where Philip was sort of a bit like, well, what's he, you know, why is he bringing this pagan thing up again? And it's like, well, I've dealt with the Ishtar issue, but now we're dealing with the Josta issue. So the Venerable Bede claimed that the word Easter came from Josta, the goddess of the Saxons. So there was a bit of overlap in the first article with this, but most of it was to do with Ishtar. Okay, so I did sort of deal with it a little bit, but not comprehensively. Bede says the first month, which the Latins call January, is Julii. February is called Solmonoth. March, Arethmonoth. April, Eustomonoth. So that's the mention. Okay. Eustomonoth has the name which is now translated Paschal month, which was once called after a goddess of theirs named Josta, in which honor feasts were celebrated in that month. Now, they designate that Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of the new rite of the time-honored name of the old observance. Okay, so he's saying that formerly they had this feast. Okay, but now they call it after the Paschal season. Okay, so it's sort of like an Easter, but it's after the Paschal season. Calling the joys of the new rite by the time-honored name of the old observance. And so saying that it's Easter is related to this pagan goddess. Okay. So While many now understand that Hislop's phonetic connection between Easter and Ishtar is without any solid linguistic evidence, they still have questions and doubts about Yosta, the goddess. So I should have really said specifically, this is probably where the guy who was printing my material, he was sort of like, oh, a bit confused about this. I probably should have said the uniquely Saxon goddess. Okay. Is the Easter Yosta theory based on some linguistic data? Because I was saying, well, this seems very convincing. I mean, yeah, the Ishtar thing seems really dumb. You've nailed that. Well, this seems convincing. That's what I'm sort of saying. And so, Helgi says, Mystery Babylon, Ancient and Modern by Ralph Woodrow. He is not King James Version only. I believe this was the book that introduced many to the pagan concept and to Hislop's book. Yeah, so I do mention Ralph Woodrow in my first article, that he sort of repented of actually writing those type of books, which was interesting. Is there Easter Yosta based upon some linguistic data? Bede notes that the native Old English month Istormanoth, Old English Ustermonth, was equivalent to the month of April, yet that feast held in the goddess's honor during Ustermanoth had gone out of use by the time of his writing and had been replaced with the Christian custom of the Paschal season. So it's like, okay, well, that's what he said. Let's look at some homophones and dictionary listings. In the English language, things called homophones. Some examples of homophones are stalk, part of a plant, and stalk, to follow, harass a person. Left, the past tense of leave, and left, opposite of right. Rose, flower, and rose, past tense of rise. Words such as carrot, carrot, and carrot, or two, and two, apply here also. In our case, we have English Easter and Yosta. Although spelt slightly differently, many English dictionaries have placed them under the same title of Easter. It must be noted that any definition that appears in a dictionary is separate from any other entry, and two entries are separate and not under the same entry. So it's a bit like if you have, left, and it's like opposite of right, or left, you left the room. You can't just amalgamate the two together. And so many English dictionaries mention both a pagan and Christian definition for Easter. 1717 English Dictionary states Easter, Aosta, Usta, a Saxon goddess whose feast they observed in Easter month April. But below is the definition Easter, the Christian Passover, in remembrance of Christ's death and resurrection, etc. Elisha Coles, 1717. Noel Webster has Easter, Istran, a Paschal feast. Easter akin to German Ostern, French, Anglo-Saxon Istre, a goddess of light or spring, in honor of whom a festival was celebrated in April, whence this month was one, an annual church festival commemorating Christ's resurrection and occurring on Sunday, the second day after Good Friday. It corresponds to the Pascha or Passover of the Jews, and most nations still give it the name under the various forms of Pascha, Pasch, and Pasch, the day on which the festival is observed. Easter Day, on which the rest of the movable feast depends, is always the first day of the 14th day of the calendar moon, which 14th day falls on, or next after the 21st of March, according to the rules laid down for the construction of the calendar, so that the 14th day on a Sunday, Easter Day, is the Sunday after. So it's a dictionary. It's hard to read that, but that's the 1828. A. Hannah says, Ruckman and Gipp and those guys were pushing Hislop in the 90s when I first heard, as well as Missler. I think the internet helped to propagate the concept as well. Yeah, it was sort of, it had flooded everywhere, I think. Most people were into the pagan myth. Nathan Bailey, in his 1802 etymological English dictionary, says Easter of Estre, Saxon, a goddess of the Saxons, in honor of whom sacrifices were offered about that time of year, Ostern, Teutonic, and then has a solemn feast appointed in commemoration of Christ's death and resurrection. That's Nathan Bailey. Don't know why that goes off the page there. Bad coding. Examples above show that Easter seems to come from Easter and Eoster. How can one reconcile and justify this use of a word? The Eastern connection. When one does a study on Easter in English, Easter and Eoster are etymologically related to the word East, but that's as far as it goes. In reality, there are many words that come from East, which is akin to German Ost, pronounced Ost. East and Ost simply have similar roots, meaning the dawn or sunrise. To Christians, this word is related to the resurrection and the rising of the sun, at which time the day of the Lord Jesus was discovered to be risen. At which time the Lord Jesus was discovered to have been risen. At the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. And very early in the morning on the first day of the week, they came to the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. Some scriptures point to the resurrection as a great dawning. But unto you who fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, in Micah 4:2. 2 Peter 1:19. We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that you take heed as unto a light that shineth in a dark place until that day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. I am the root and offspring of David, the bright and morning star, Revelation 22:16. While pagans obviously named their goddess after East for whatever reasons they did, it must be abundantly clear that the word East is totally neutral and is neither Christian or pagan. There are several examples of neutral words being related to East, one being the Germanic Österreich, which is simply loud motorbike. Österreich, which is simply known as the country of Austria, from Uster, East, and Reich, kingdom, Österreicher. Österreich, which includes the word Uster being the same word Luther used. Excuse me for that yawn. I'm reading a lot of text here. Being the same word Luther used for Easter in his Bible, and the same word claimed to be a pagan goddess. Austria, while having Uster in it, is not related to a Christian Uster or the pagan Uster, but simply means East Kingdom. Many words in all languages can have a similar root, like underwear, understanding, undermine, but this does not mean these words are exclusively associated. There's nothing evil about East, and words that derive from it should not be seen as close relatives of each other with good or evil meanings. Uster simply means East in German, and because a goddess is named after such a common term, should not taint any other common word related to Ust. Pagan Christianity. Just because a pagan goddess existed does not mean that Easter derives from Eoster in any shape or form. In my research, I have concluded that Easter derived from the German word to resurrect and remains so today, as I expressed in my earlier articles. Our word Easter is of Saxon origin and of precisely the same import with its German cognate Ostern. The latter is derived from the old Teutonic form of Erfurchterhen, Erfurchterhang, that is, a resurrection. But for argument's sake, I'll just put the banner back up there. If anyone wants to join, just jump in. But for argument's sake, let us amuse ourselves with the concept that the name Easter originated from a pagan goddess. What is the worst case scenario of such an association? Well, etymologically, the name of the goddess Eoster simply means morning. If a local witch called her cult the dawn of the morning, relating back to a goddess, I wouldn't stop using the word morning, even if I found it had derived from the same evil place. Christ even uses morning as part of his title, Revelation 22:16. It's interesting, morning star, Lucifer, the whole thing. I actually didn't mean that. I was just like, it's related to morning, Old High German historian means to dawn. East is not evil, morning is not evil. In fact, does Satan own any words? Any words his to claim, and are we forbidden to use them? What if perhaps the early church, what if perhaps the early English Christians took the entire idea of Easter to slap the pagan goddess in the face and proclaim that Jesus is the only resurrection, with the testimony of the Anglo-Saxons Christians' rejection of this goddess? So it's like, we're gonna use your name and we're gonna use it for Jesus. I mean, didn't that sort of happen with the New Testament, with the use of theos and with the use of Christos, a Messiah, with the use of Tartaros, talking about hell, talking about Hades? I mean, didn't God use a completely pagan language and sanctify it by the word of God? God said it was fine. So if you do that in English, apparently you're off the wall. But it's like, so. But remember, this is just for argument's sake, okay? But realistically, many words come from pagan concepts, such as days of the week. Friday means day of Frigg, being the name of a Norse goddess. Wednesday and Saturday also derived from pagan gods Woden and Saturnus. When we evaluate the pagan roots concept, it really comes down to the Hebrew roots and sacred names concept. Books like Pagan Christianity label almost everything pagan. Well, of course it is. No culture and language was sanctified except for the culture of the Jews in the Old Testament. Therefore, everything non-Hebrew is thus by default pagan. So we can say anything's pagan. You want to do a translation to Japanese, what sort of words are they going to use? They're going to use their words, which they probably use for pagan things. It's like, duh. And so anyway, so unless we are all planning on becoming Jewish and practicing their customs and language, we use the language of those around us. As the New Testament writers use the thoroughly pagan Koine Greek with words like theos, which is used to describe Greek gods, or concepts like Hades, which in the New Testament is translated as hell, but in Greek mythology was the god of the underworld. If the writers of the sacred scripture under inspiration of God, so I shouldn't really say under inspiration of God, because I used to sort of think that God inspired them. It was like this orb that sort of went around them, but it's actually the words that they were either saying or writing down. That's when it became inspired, not they were under an inspiration. Okay, so it's a little bit different, but it's just trying to make a distinction from the Pope saying whatever I say he's inspired, sort of thing. Everything he does is inspired. It's like, no, not everything Paul did was inspired, but the scriptures were inspired. All scripture is given by inspiration of God. Under the inspiration of God, didn't see any evil conspiracy to borrow such pagan words and to use them for the glory of God, nor should we. How can a translation be done into any culture if we cannot use the common words of that culture? So even just reading through this, I'm just thinking in retrospect about the mindset of Philip Powell. And, and he was a great guy. And one of the reasons why I supported his ministry and helped him in everything he did and helped with the magazines and all that sort of stuff was because I agreed with the vast majority of what he was saying. But I think he sort of missed the point with this. He felt like I'd nailed the whole pagan thing, where here I'm sort of saying, there is a slight possibility that there could have been a pagan goddess, but it's like, even if there was, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. If the worst case scenario, it's not a big deal. But then I said, but I personally don't think such a thing happened. England and Germany are large places and traditionally had a rich culture. Just because a word is a homophone does not mean that the meaning is shared. East simply referred to the dawn or sunrise, and we need to recognize that both pagans and Christians wished to use the word East for their respective purposes. Perhaps, as I assume, these two factions may have even been in separate locations in the German-speaking world and merely have the neutral word East as their common bond. So there has been some proof. So is there proof of this goddess? So when I did the video of this in 2015, which is much better than this article, because I read through the article, then I add a whole bunch of stuff about Bede in the end, sort of saying, well, people are sort of asking questions whether there was this goddess. It's only really Bede who is the reference. Now, I'm going to jump onto another video, which is done by some atheist guys, and I'm going to show that. Maybe I can fast forward it to a few pertinent bits, but I sort of feel led to go into that direction. And it's only just come out in the last week, so we're going to quickly look at that. But I'll just go through this. So not everything that begins with Ost or English East is related to a pagan Easter, nor for that matter a Christian Easter. If I did this in the English language, words like Allah, and said anything with al sound is evil, like Alexandria, alien, alchemy, etc., I'd be laughed at by linguists. Now, just suppose Satan worshippers worshipped on a hill called the Western Mount. Just because the term West is in the name of the mount, it doesn't mean it's related to Westminster. And it's etymologically absurd to think so. Osterberg in German simply means eastern city, from Oster, eastern, and Berg, city or town. Places like Westminster, Southampton, are simply names related to a particular direction. I suppose soon people will use these phony phonetic comparisons to rationale that Australia is Australia, the wicked nation of sex and eggs. We wouldn't naturally assume that George Bush has etymological links to the burning bush. And we don't think youth in Asia is euthanasia, or that X sample is an egg sample. So shall we reject Easter? Dr. Paul Mayer, professor of ancient history at Western Michigan University, observes that if all evidence is weighed carefully and fairly, it is indeed justifiable, according to the canons of historical research, to conclude that the sepulchre of Joseph of Arimathea, in which Jesus was buried, was actually empty on the morning of the first Easter. Okay, so then I've got all the references. So that's pretty much the article. I've only got 10 references. Like now, if I wrote that article, I would just have probably 40 references. So anyway, if you go through my Revelation 16:5 book, you can see lots of references. So I am going to go to, so we've gone through quite a lot of stuff. My first and second article. Now I'm going to leave that one open, and I'll shut all these other ones down. Yeah, it is a shame because I don't think that all of these articles were put online, because I copied I made sure my Easter ones were there. Oh, they have put them online actually. Actually, no, I paid for someone to put these online. That's right. It's a lot of work, but I'm glad it's all still up there. There's a lot of interesting things. Look, Australian Royal Commission investigation into child sex abuse, and so they're talking about, this is about Frank Houston, the Hillsong thing. See, Philip Powell used to be the general secretary of the Assemblies of God Church in Australia, and he quit over the whole Benny Hinn, people like Benny Hinn coming into the church and laughing revival. He was just like, this is ridiculous, so he left in 1992. But he was coming out talking about the child abuse of Frank Houston for years and years and years, and Frank Houston was saying he was a devil and all sorts of things. But then after it came out that he was a child abuser, everyone stopped agreeing with him, but or not everyone. But then, so he was right up until 2014. Philip gave us a lot of information about Hillsong, and we gave that to the Royal Commission. That Royal Commission that happened there. So that's nearly 10 years ago now. Time flies. So anyway, I don't want to rabbit trail onto other things and just be nostalgic. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's when Philip passed away. But see, as you can see, it's like, these contending earnestly for the faith, and there was another one called Vanguard, which is not there. And I've got ones that date all the way back to all the way through the 90s. But lots of things. Hillsong, AOG, and the papacy, 2005, talking about their relationship with each other. But look, no items found. And can you load it? No. And so it's just a shame. But where are those articles? So it's a lot of work. And you can see, as soon as Philip passed away, they did 3 more and shut down. And it's a shame. And a lot of really good people involved with this. Now, God told me not to get involved with the church. It was a bit of a funny story. I went to one of the conferences. Philip invited me, so I went, and the only person I knew was Philip. So I'm hanging around the main guy, And I had asked them, I'd asked Philip, do you want me to work on a bookshop for you guys? Because they sold heaps of books. And he was like, yeah, that'd be great. And so then I received an email saying, we don't want you to do a bookshop for us. Not from him, but from someone else in leadership or whatever. And I was like, okay, cool. The offer was there, but if you don't want me to do it, that's fine. And then when I went to the conference, it was like Philip would go, oh, this is Nick Sayers, blah, blah, blah. And people would say, oh, you're the guy who didn't do the bookshop when you promised to. And I was like, no, I actually had someone tell me not to do it. And they would be like, pfft. And this is the first time I'm meeting these people. And these people are all Christians. And I'm just like, okay. And it happened like about 8 times in different scenarios because I stayed there for a few days. And I was just thinking, what's with these people? And they just kept bringing it up. And it was just like, oh, you're the one who you said that you were going to do a bookshop for these guys and you didn't do it. I'm just thinking, mate, I'm running all their websites for free. Like, it's it was ridiculous. And I was just shocked at how their behavior was. And so it was like the Holy Spirit was saying, don't get involved with this group, man. That what they're saying might be true, but there wasn't any warmth for just someone from the outside popping in like, hi guys, I'm helping support this whole ministry thing, and I'm doing IT, and they were just like, you're not doing this. It was just like, okay, whatever. And then so anyway, I thought, well, maybe I said to Philip, do you want me to do a bookshop for you? He was like, yeah, that'd be great. So I actually sourced a guy to do it for me. I think he was in Indonesia, and it was going to cost $3,000. And I gave it, no, it was going to cost $1,000, sorry. And I gave him $300 as a deposit, and he took it and ran. And so it was like, I was out of pocket. It was just, and that reinforced everyone. Like, he said he was going to do it, and now I'd really said I was going to do it, and it wasn't happening. And I was just like, and so, yeah, they probably blamed me for everything. I just felt like I was just getting blamed. The more I tried to help, the more they were blaming me. So anyway, this isn't really about Easter. As I said, I shouldn't really go down this nostalgic sort of path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to YouTube. Now let's type in, okay, so I've got the Easter discussion. There's 5 people watching. Now, surely someone wants to jump on and put their ugly mug up here and have a chat. But let's just type in Easter again. Okay. 3 years ago, 7 days ago. Okay. Pagan origins of Easter. You got all these goddesses and all sorts of things. Okay. This one, history for atheists. Now, if you want to listen to an atheist who actually knows what they're talking about, and he comes against the race and says are illiterates, making out all these Christian festivals are pagan is stupid. And so I'm actually going to run through this video. I'm going to let this video run. Now, I'm not sure if it's copyrighted, so I'll just check. So this came out yesterday, I'm pretty sure. Now, I already knew what they were going to say because he's already done one on Easter being pagan. So, but he has an interview here. So, I'm just checking it. Doesn't look like the volume's working. Okay, so I will jump out of there. Stop streaming there. Present. Share screen. Entire screen. Screen 2. Share system audio. Got it.
Hello, and welcome.
Good.
Welcome back to History for Atheists. Just today is Dr. Andrew Henry, who is an adjunct professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so we'll just let that just sort of catch up a little bit. Okay. I'm just going to shut down anything I don't need here. So yeah, Facebook chews up a lot. So let's get rid of that. I don't need that up there. Okay.
Antique Mediterranean religion. He's also the writer and presenter of the excellent Religion for Breakfast YouTube, which is a great resource of being entertaining as it is informative. Andrew has several videos debunking some of the erroneous but persistent pop history tropes that we find repeated in the culture. One of these is the annual repetition of the Christmas.
Okay, so it's not really working well. I'll just see what else I can shut down. Okay, I've got the whole Adobe Studio working behind the scenes. That should help. But remember the old days where you'd start a video and it would buffer and it would get to like halfway and you could even be off the internet and it would still play it, So I don't know why they only just go to there, but
pagan in origin. So every year we see online atheist activists accepting these claims without question, and Christians are in fact.
Does it go like 10 seconds now? Which is a shame. It's just all straight live streaming, So I'm trying to conserve my bandwidth here. I don't know. I guess it's here in Australia. It's Good Friday, So I guess everyone is at home just watching stuff, and so it does happen on like Christmas, and your internet just goes all of a sudden just goes really slow. So that could be an issue. But let me just see what I can do about that. Not much.
Allegedly pagan feasts. This is especially odd when applied to, given the pretty obvious.
It's going to be a big thing. So anyway, if you want to watch this, I would recommend you watch it, because pretty much they're saying exactly what I'm saying. I'll send you a link to that. Maybe it's actually, I can drop down the quality. So let's just drop the quality right down. Ooh. All right, let's see how that goes.
Season commemorating the death of Jesus and the claim he rose again.
Stopping and starting. So yeah, I think if you guys go to that link, you can watch that, or just type in, Andrew Henry, Easter and Pagan Origins. I skimmed through it because a lot of it was sort of what I just said, but obviously these guys are atheists, so they're not coming from a Christian perspective. So another really good article that I would recommend people read is the brilliant KJV Today. That's the .com. We want .net. Here we go. Type in Easter. It's a very good article, and we sort of, when this was being written, we were chatting a lot about different things about Easter. Comes against Easter being a pagan word, and one of the things is the beginning of, say, the Bible, to use Easter, to find Easter forever, shows that the Easter, most from 1611 till now, most references for Easter is to the resurrection celebration, not to Passover. So the goddess Ishtar or Astarte. Okay. So it goes through that issue. The two Babylons. It's a very well written article. The guy who has written this, I know him personally. I can't give out his. He's asked me not to tell people who he is, but all I can say is he's an intellectual guy. He's very smart. He's a polyglot, and this is a very well written article. Okay, it's just a great site. This site has been very helpful for everyone. Soup Bone Jones says, how about churches having Easter egg hunts on Easter? They make it a pagan holiday. So the Easter thing with the eggs, to me, it was just something that happened in the Middle Ages, where people were decorating eggs, and the egg became a symbol of new life, sort of like you're coming out of the tomb or whatever, and just having eggs. And so people would paint the eggs and decorate them, which is not like, if you're going to say something's pagan just because it's not Hebrew, yes, it's pagan. But if you're going to say something's pagan, satanically pagan, eggs are pretty common. Most cultures would have had eggs. So to paint and decorate an egg, it's not a huge deal. To me, it's not a deal breaker. It's like, to have eggs. I understand you go to the supermarket today, there's going to be bunnies and eggs everywhere. And it's ridiculous. It's like, what's this got to do with anything? But it's commercialization. We understand they destroy everything. Christmas is a Santa Claus, regardless. I mean, Christmas isn't strictly a Christian festival, biblical festival, I should really say. But the whole concept of the whole world talking about the birth of Jesus Christ, it's like, well, maybe it's not a bad thing, but that's been usurped by Santa Claus and presents, and you can sort of have Easter and Christmas without even mentioning Jesus, sort of nowadays. Agreed, Soupbone. All holidays are commercially paganized. Yeah. And if you were to make a case against Christmas, I would sort of say, yeah, I can understand. If you wanted to be strictly biblical, but if there's nothing wrong with me going, okay, well, let's just make January the 9th a day where we celebrate that Jesus healed people. Let's do that. There's nothing wrong with that. I understand why people want to separate from Christmas. There's a whole bunch of traditional weird stuff that goes with it. Easter, it's only really the bunnies, and the bunnies were usually because in England and places around Europe, rabbits were very frequent, where lambs were a little bit rarer, but rabbits were very frequent, and so to kill rabbits and eat them on that time period was very frequent, because in spring all the rabbits came out. That's sort of like the time of it's after the snow's melted and spring's here, and there's hundreds of rabbits around, so let's shoot them and kill them, let's eat them. And so it just became sort of like mixed things, like just there's lots of rabbits around, or let's eat these rabbits, or let's pretend these rabbits are like the Passover lamb or whatever. And so there's a whole mix of all these different things coming together, and of course over 2,000 years having some sort of an Easter celebration that is celebrated by so many diverse cultures. Of course there's going to be some weird things here and there, or some aberrations, but I mean, even the rabbit thing is not a big deal to me. It's just like, well, it's spring, but then it's like the spring goddess and a rabbit is a Playboy bunny and all this stuff. It's like, no. So anyway, great article here. If you go through that, and yeah, well, unless I can get this working again, which I don't think I can, I think I should probably end the stream, because I was going to play a few videos and just sort of let it run, but I don't think that it's going to work that way.
You're clearly Christian in origin. So today I discussed the claims about Easter with Andrew, and then the topic of this pagan origins idea in general in popular culture. Andrew Henry, welcome to History for Atheism.
No, because you wouldn't just let it buffer. Yeah, sometimes I remember in the old days, you used to buffer all the way, and then you could actually disconnect from the internet and watch it. It's like it downloaded onto your computer. So anyway, so I guess that ends my stream. So I'm going to have a debate with TurretinFan, and so that is going to be 11 o'clock Australian time on the 12th. So I guess that would be on the 11th, US time, probably about, say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm assuming. Depends on where you are in the US. But yeah, so that should be an interesting debate. So he's debating and saying that Easter is a mistranslation. So anyway, guys, unless someone wants to join in or ask questions or anything like that, I'm just going to bail. So I'll maybe give like 5 minutes for that. If anyone wants to join in, here's the link again. So Bold as a Lion said, excellent research, Nick. I enjoyed all your articles and knowledge on the Easter issue. Thanks, Bold as a Lion. That's a good encouragement. So if anyone wants to join, jump on there. We can chat or argue. If you don't agree, that'll be great. You can come on, rebuke me, and then I'll join your crew. So you're probably wondering why I'm on a channel, History for Atheists. These guys, they do a really good job for their atheist community, not to argue stupid arguments. So this one, the Great Library of Alexandria, I'd recommend anyone jump on board and look at that, because like some of them are stupid, okay? But yeah, here we have the pagan thing a year ago. So that's the one where I realized, they've come on board with, yeah, they've got this guy, Jesus Mythicism. I don't really like him. He just seems really just arrogant. And, you get these atheists who are just hyper arrogant. But he's actually got some that I haven't seen. Constantine in the Bible. Yeah, the Great Library of Alexandria, Part 1 and Part 2. Most Christians need to listen to that. It talks of, because the whole concept of Christians destroyed the library at Alexandria, it just comes against that. And you can data mine through this, and there is some interesting things to listen to. And obviously they're atheists, so they'll turn around and say, yes, and Christianity is stupid, blah, 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 And so you go, okay, well, the Bible says in their heart there is no God. Okay, well, I think that apart from that, so I guess the next video I will do will probably might be on, I guess, Saturday evening for American people. That will probably continue on with the James White, Thomas Ross debate, going through that, because I want to try and tidy that up so then I can move on to other things. Okay. So no one has jumped up to the plate and wants to come on live. Some random guy did for a couple of seconds there, and I thought it was Dan Straight, but it wasn't. So yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for watching, and we will not continue, but we'll chat more about the Thomas Ross debate and James White. So Helg says, in the secular world, the most non-Christian holiday is Christmas, and the focus is on Santa. Though Jesus is part of it, but only as a baby, not a threat. Yeah, they all love the baby Jesus. And it's sort of funny because I think it was like one of those, those cartoony South Park or what's the other one, Family Guy. You watch like 20 seconds of it and you're already like offended. It's like they're so bad. But there was one where it was like maybe it wasn't them. It was something where they loved baby Jesus. So I remember watching this clip. And we really love baby Jesus. And so it was just funny because that's the world. They're like, we love baby Jesus. Who can't love a baby? It's like you have to love baby Jesus. And so it was just a comedy, but it spoke. Sometimes comedy, it seems like it's the last bastion of free speech in the world. And that's why, these comedians who are really crass and just say whatever comes to their mind, and it's just X-rated drivel, But at the end of the day, these are the ones who are coming out and saying stuff, and it's like, we need to cancel them. And like, cancel me, I don't care. They're just, what's his name, Dave Chappelle. And so the guys at work follow him. quite a lot and talk about him. But at the end of the day, he's actually standing for freedom of speech. I mean, so the thing is that the pastor stands there, like even in the Gold Coast here, we had probably about maybe 8 years ago, there was a guy there and just preaching. And so, you know, these people who were from the alphabet soup community, they come up and said, yeah, what do you think about homosexuality? And so he just got the Bible, read the scripture, and there were police there, and they came and arrested him and put him in a jail cell. This is in Australia. So they let him out. Now he went to court, and he was cleared, and he actually got compensated. So that's one of the good things in Australia. If you do take it to the nth degree, you will get compensated. You'll get a lot of money. A friend of mine got $25,000 for being falsely arrested and shut down, and so. But yeah, this other guy, George, his name is. I met him a few times. So he used to preach where I used to always preach, and I used to say my opinion, not just read. He just read the Bible, and got shut down. And so the thing is, pastors around the world are saying that type of thing. You just say, hey, you know, this is what I think, or this is what the Bible says, and you're getting shut down. Where some guy can get up there and say the most vilest, disgusting things, and talk about, you know, things that would make your skin crawl, and because they're a comedian, they get away with it. We just see double standards everywhere, and I think that's the thing that can be really frustrating for us in Western society. We're taught about equality and everyone's equal and all this, and you see this inequality everywhere. So it's just weird. You know, why do these people get all the airtime and Christians don't get any? You know, or why do they only just focus on weird Christians? You know. Why don't they have any TV shows that just have normal Christianity, just Bible preaching? You know, so why is it always Benny Hinn and these other weirdos? Is there an agenda for that? You know, to make people hate Christians? And so, anyway, that's the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to bail. Okay, so happy Easter / resurrection. God bless you.